All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to AURI Connect's Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connect's monthly event series featuring updates on the work that the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. I'm Alexandra Deemer, AURI's Business Development Director of Novel Supply Chains, and your host for today's event, focusing on growing and developing markets for Minnesota oilseeds. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota, and Fields of Innovation is supported in sponsorship from Bremer Bank and Main Street businesses focused on food and agriculture initiative. Fields of Innovation events bring together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity, successfully commercialize new crops, and to accelerate the commercialization of new crop and livestock opportunities, including new traits for existing crops. By connecting innovation and market development with value chain partners, Fields of Innovation aims to build a strong ecosystem in Minnesota and its border states that will provide ag producers and value chain partners with new market opportunities. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Also remember, participants are muted, but you can ask questions through the Q&A portal on your screen, which we will be answering before the close of our program today, so be sure to stick around for that. Before we dive into today's topic, I'm happy to welcome our event sponsors, Mark Schober of Bremer Bank and Gwen Walters of the Main Street Businesses Focused on Food and Ag Initiative.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Mark Schober, Director of Specialized Agriculture Solutions for Bremer Bank. And just want to say thanks to AURI and the other sponsors for making these awesome events possible. We sponsor the Fields of Innovation as kind of thinking outside the box of new ways for farm producers to generate revenue or agribusinesses throughout these changing times. Bremer is celebrating our 80th year of existence. And if you think through 80 years of ag, we've gone through quite a few different revolutions. So it kind of comes full circle to Fields of Innovation of what's going to be the next thing that we look back at 20 years ago and say, wow, can't believe we weren't doing that. So welcome, and we're proud to sponsor. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for providing me a few minutes to share information with you on a little program doing big things in southern Minnesota. Through a collaborative approach to small business recovery, Main Street businesses focused on food and agriculture is reducing barriers to access for entrepreneurs seeking customized consulting and training services. Our network of experts is ready to help you get connected, drive solutions, and grow your business venture. Funding for this project was made possible through a small business administration grant called Community Navigator. Minnesota State University Mankato Strategic Partnership Center has partnered with Green Seam, Region 9 Development Commission, AURI, Southern Agriculture Center of Excellence at South Central College, and Mogwai Collaborative at the Hubbard Building to provide technical assistance for our food and agriculture businesses throughout the region. A few of our success stories include connecting local producers to resources that help them better manage their businesses, providing one-on-one consulting in a variety of areas such as financial management, site plan preparation, business and marketing plan creation, and so much more. In our region, we've seen an increased number of entrepreneurs in the food and agriculture space accessing assistance to start and grow their business in the Green Seam. Thank you for sharing your time and talents today. Enjoy the event, and I'm so sorry that I couldn't join you in person.
All right. Please welcome our partners who will introduce the opportunities for oilseed utilization and the pathways to commercialization that their businesses are pursuing. We will kick off our morning with a big picture market analysis from Allison Thompson of the Money Farm, then move into our first presentation panel for established oilseed crops in a changing marketplace, led by Dr. Dave Berklinger of North Dakota State University Extension, and featuring Dennis Egan of Epitome Energy, Jennifer Webster of CHS, and Frayne Olson of North Dakota State University's Sunflower Supply Chain Coordination Team. Next, Matt Levitt of the University of Minnesota's Forever Green Initiative will introduce us to our second presentation panel on emerging oilseed crops and associated utilization opportunities, featuring Ratan Chopra of CoverPress, Darren Greenfield of Yield 10 Bioscience, and Harold Stanislavski of AURI. We will then have a conversation with 2 Minnesota oilseed growers, Ann Schwegerl and Jerry Hasnittle, moderated by Russ Gesh of the USDA's Ag Research Service. Finally, Luca Zullo of AURI will introduce the prospects for developing new uses at the Ag Innovation Campus. We will then take a short 10-minute break for our in-person attendees to grab lunch before opening the floor to both our live and virtual audiences for questions. This will close our program before those of us in Crookston will convene for a tour of the new AIC facility. Allison Thompson, please join me on stage. Allison Thompson is a commodity broker and market analyst with the Money Farm located in Ada, Minnesota. She recently purchased the Money Farm and looks forward to continuing the business Mike Krieger started 37 years ago. Prior to joining the grain marketing industry in 2007, Allison attended the University of Minnesota Crookston, studying ag business and ag education. She found great interest in commodity markets and trading while working as a farm business management instructor with Lake Region State College. She is also actively involved in her family's grain farm. Her husband and father grow corn, soybeans, wheat, and barley near Mahnomen, Minnesota. Allison has turned her experiences in the field and classroom into a career where she is able to help producers facing the challenges of today's market.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for having me this morning. Oh, sorry. I'm with the Money Farm. I'm the new owner, like she said, and obviously a market analyst. I work with a lot of farmers in the area, but I also have a branch office in Northwest Iowa. So it's really interesting to see some of these comparisons. I usually work on supply and demand numbers, but this emerging energy market is definitely something worth watching as it continues to progress and obviously move into our region. So I'm looking forward to learning more today as well. So I always start with a little bit of maybe not the best thing for making our kids necessarily eat their vegetables. I know it doesn't work in my house, but it is something that's emerging around the world. It's obviously become something domestically that we're talking about, but it's global as well. And it's going to have implications going forward. So maybe for some of us, it'll help our kids eat our vegetables a little bit more because that's what we're dealing with. So I'm going to talk about the rush to crush and give you just a general overview of what you're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to go through some of the main things she had talked about, the basic rise of renewable biofuels, what's starting this progress, also some viable feedstock options, and the outlook for oilseed supply and demand moving forward. So starting with the rise of renewable biofuels, I think it's first and foremost really important to understand these terms that you're going to be hearing about today. I'm sure you probably have an understanding of it, but just as a review, generally a biofuel by definition is fuels or blending components produced from biomass. And today we're talking a lot about obviously plants and how that can be turned into these biofuels, but it can also be other things as well. Another one that's being used is animal fat and things like that as well. But when we're talking about biofuels, they generally are talking about transportation fuels. And so some of the main ones that we've heard talked about, one that's obviously pretty well known in our area for a while now is ethanol, and that's alcohol fuel blends blended into petroleum, mainly produced from corn. And then back in 2021, it actually accounted for 85% of the US biofuel production. So a pretty big part of the picture, and still is, to be honest with you. The next one is biodiesel. That's another blend blended with petroleum. That's the second largest. Renewable diesel is the one that's up and coming, and that's going to be different. It's not a blend, it's 100% vegetable oil. So it's chemically equal to petroleum diesel, can be used as a replacement. They call it a drop-in fuel. And there's also other biofuels out there. We're seeing some emerging markets as well. Heating oil, jet fuel is another one that we're talking about, and also renewable gasoline. So there's a lot of other parts still emerging on the biofuel front. We're not necessarily just stuck to these three, but there are other pieces. So just looking back at a history of biofuels production over time, really starting back in the 80s, kind of slow progress, but we've really seen a really big uptick in biofuel production, really starting around that 2007 timeline is really when it started to pick up and really progressed pretty rapidly from there. Another one seeing another big boom somewhere around 2011, just a few dates to note out to you. But obviously you can see ethanol was obviously the main driver here of a lot of these biofuels and production. With biodiesel starting to enter the picture, and now we're seeing renewable diesel also enter into a lot of this US production as well. And the same can be said for consumption. It looks pretty similar to my production chart as well, right? So looking at this, why did we see this big rise? Well, honestly, it has a lot to do with our government programs and policies that are encouraging this movement. The main one being, like I mentioned, in 2005, and you can see that's kind of when we started to see some rapid increase to our consumption and also production of biofuels. This renewable fuel standard still in effect, but started in 2005, and that required some blending requirements. There's some blending volumes being added to petroleum-based transportation fuel to replace it or at least reduce its use. In 2011, we saw the California's low carbon fuel standards come into place, and that one too, you can see that added this other boom, but we started to see in 2011 biodiesel enter the picture and also renewable diesel. And that's because California, unlike just blending requirements, also wants this low carbon fuel. Well, actually, when you break it down, the carbon footprint of biodiesel and renewable fuels is actually better than ethanol. So that's why we're seeing this boom start at that time into some of these other energies as well. But looking at this, California's the LCFS, as they call it, we're looking at an ever smaller carbon footprint. So as it progresses over time, they do want us to use some lower carbon footprint fuels, and that's going to hopefully mean that we're going to be starting to see more of a turn to these other renewable fuels and renewable diesel. So with that, just as a projection, so looking forward, we are probably going to start seeing this renewable fuels actually increase or overtake some biodiesel requirements because they do want those lower carbon fuels to be used more just on that standard, and again has to do with some of those credits. But another interesting part of this too with renewable diesel is that we can use existing infrastructure as well. Like I said, it is kind of used interchangeably with petroleum. So with that, we do have some existing infrastructure that can be turned over for renewable fuels fairly simply. So just looking at some plans for biodiesel and renewable, you can see they're kind of spaced out, and I'll talk about this a little bit more as we go forward. So some viable feedstocks, like I said, obviously have to do not only with the volumes we're seeing, but has to relate back to some of those credits. And I am talking a lot about California because they really did start this, and it's starting to be implemented in other states and even talked about here as well. So it's important to kind of understand some of these credits and how they work and how they're starting to make a push for some of these other renewable fuels. So just looking in California's base, since this started in 2011, we did see tallow, which is animal fats, become a good use, but we saw used cooking oil also increase. Obviously, ethanol is a big part of that, but we've seen this really good growth of soy as well. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, as well as canola. So looking at biodiesel and feedstocks just for last year on how this was used, soybean oil, obviously a big taker in this on the renewable fuel side. Soy oil is also a decent part of the picture, but we're also looking at other feedstocks and again, some of those animal fats, tallow as well. So why are we seeing this turn towards some of these feedstocks and what's going to be viable? Well, a lot of what we're talking about and you're just going to hear about today are these different oil seeds. And that's because they do have good oil seed content, right? It can be easily turned into the oil. On the other side, we're seeing soybeans. That's the main one we're talking about in our area. But soybeans don't have as high of an oil content as some of these other ones. So why are we using soybeans? Well, it's readily available, right? It's something that's in production here. It's something that we can see readily available, and that's causing this turn in our area. So soybeans may not have the highest soybean content or oil content, but it is probably more viable on that option. But it does leave room for some of these other markets to start emerging in that space as well. So just looking at the soybean, in this case, oil, like I said, makes up that 18 to 21% of the seed component, but we have another major component, which is the meal. And talking with some people earlier this morning, that's a big question, right? We know that oil can find a use, and now it's the question of the meal. Years ago, it was just the opposite. Meal was the driver. Everybody wanted the meal for protein source, and now it's kind of flipped, and we're seeing that flip happen here into the oil. So now the question is, what do we do with this other large component of the meal? And that could definitely be a challenge, and it's something the market has to figure out yet. But it's important to understand some of these other byproducts with the market. Obviously, the oil byproducts, very important here, especially when we're talking about biofuels and these renewable diesels. But there are other uses, right? Cooking oil is used in some industrial uses as well. But how about the meal? What are some things we could do with that? Well, obviously, it's a good protein source, and it's used around the world, and it's widely available. There are other countries that do export a large amount of oil and meal on the market, but it is widely used as a good protein source. So we could see that export market obviously pick up, but we also know it can be used in foods and things like that as well. But there probably are some other markets for the meal that we haven't even seen come up yet, that could also take some of this byproduct for use as well in this area. So looking at the outlook now, turning into what our supply and demand factors look like, just looking at expectations here, there obviously with these plants growing, crush plants, renewable diesels, and renewable fuels, we are looking at a pretty big bounce in capacity here just over the next couple of years. So pretty substantial. Another way to look at it, I know this chart looks pretty steep, but just another way to look at it is also seeing this production capacity increase, but also the vegetable oil and feedstock requirements. Obviously a pretty steep growth that we're going to see too, and we're going to have to come up with a plan to feed those needs going forward. So as of right now, when we're looking at these seed needs, we are starting to see some progress to the north. And this does show existing plants, which are the blue, some expansion in the orange, and then some new plants in that kind of green color. So previously, a lot of these crush plants were mainly through those I states, and that's because that's where the U.S. has the most production, obviously, of soybeans. So the plants were right there and available to it. The other spot we see existing are on the southeast coast, and this is because this is where poultry production is. So a lot of that meal could be readily available right there for use. But now we're starting to see the expansion come up into our area because we are another big producer of soybeans, so we would have that available too. Now the question is where is it going to go? Some of these other byproducts, and how do we transport it there? And that leads us to our challenges. Typically in our area, these soybeans are used for exports. We're already ready to ship out to the West Coast. So can that be changed over to meal for some other export markets? Could we take that over? Looking at this big jump in oilseeds, we don't make more land, right? So how is this acre play going to be figured out? Are we going to see different crop rotations? Are we going to turn more to oilseeds in our area? Are we going to see some alternatives come in? Another thing too with some of these plants that are popping up, you know, we need to see them be sustainable. I know I've heard a lot of comparisons from farmers, and they're always good for a few comparisons, is what's going to happen with these plants that are popping up. We saw in the ethanol industry when we had that boom, there were lots of plants that were supposed to pop up and benefit our area, and some did grow and turn out really well and are still producing today. Others didn't. So are we going to see that same kind of fluctuation happen in our area too? And joint ventures and ventures with crush and processing plants and diesel fuels and some of these other things might be some good things to have as a background for some of these plants. We're also facing some increased feedstock prices. Now, lo and behold, the last couple of months, Lord, I know that soybean prices have fallen from their highs, but they still do remain pretty elevated. So we're probably going to see some pretty steep competition here between both markets until we find our groove of where that's going to be. Also logistics, like I said, we're kind of set up right now to export to the West Coast for soybeans, that is, but how do we switch that? Are we going to be exporting meal? How do we get the oil from here to California? All these different things still kind of need to be worked out. There definitely is getting in place, but there are some things yet to figure out in it, especially if we see this rapid growth. We're also subject to policy updates. Like I said, this big growth happened because of these government policies that were put into place, but they're always subject to change, right? So if we get a new administration, if we see some policy changes, what does that do to this industry? If we see this take over, that's great. But what happens if it changes? If we see a drastic change all of a sudden, it could definitely have an impact on the industry. And of course, we need to talk about meeting these global demand factors. So obviously I focused a lot on the US and the expansion that we're supposed to see here, but it's global as well. And here's just a look at some of these biofuel production by volume that we're supposed to just see change here from 2001 to 2027. So seeing a big growth, obviously in the US, but also in Europe. And what are they using? In the US, we're supposed to be seeing a big jump in soy oil. But when you look at Europe, we're seeing a big jump in palm oil, corn in Brazil. So there's a lot of different things that are taking place as well. And it's how does the US fit into that picture as we move forward? So that's a general overview of what you're going to hear about today. You'll have a lot of experts with some very good information. But this is just a general overview of what you're going to be hearing about today. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me anytime.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that. And now I get the right page over here. Please join me on stage, Dr. Dave Ripplinger, and our established oilseed presentation panel. Dr. Dave Ripplinger is a bioenergy and bioproduct economist with the North Dakota State University Extension Service and an associate professor in the Department of Agribusiness and Applied Economics at North Dakota State University. In these roles, David conducts research and provides support to farmers and the bioenergy industry. Welcome. We have a couple more joining us. Yeah, Dennis and Brady is here, and Jennifer is joining us virtually.
Great, thank you. And we'll just dive in quick. Brian, I believe you're the first speaker. For those of you who don't know Frayne, I just met him this morning. Frayne is a crops economist and actually wear many hats at NDSU. And obviously in this region plays a really important role in educating, being engaged with, providing various expertise to a number of industries, including the oilseed industry. And up here, it is more than just soybeans. And so he has a kind of a breadth of understanding, as well as an understanding of the interconnectedness of all of these different markets, which is really of critical importance. So Frayne, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Excellent. Yep, perfect. I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sunflower, because that was kind of the assigned topic. Was going to focus on sunflower and kind of the role that sunflower might play in this expansion as we move into the renewable fuels area. So the first thing as I have studied what's going on, we have to put things in kind of perspective on the relative size of sunflower relative to some of the other oil seeds. Now, Allison did a really, really nice job of kind of setting this up, looking at the relative oil content. I know there's been a lot of interest as we move into, again, renewable fuels. Where's the feedstock going to come from? And what is sunflower's role specifically in that? So first we have to think about volumes and size. The size of the US energy markets are massive relative to US ag markets. So if we think about our largest crop that we grow in the United States is corn by volume as well as by acreage. We're taking right now about a 10% blend, about 10% of the gasoline supply comes from ethanol. That 10% accounts for almost 40% of all the corn we use. Okay, so relative size, as I study what's going on in the oilseed market, and in particular, the sunflower portion of this, the sunflower market is really a very specialized, smaller segment. When we think about feedstocks for renewable diesel, renewable fuels, yes, right now everybody's looking at soybeans because of the size of the soybean market relative to, again, this canola market and as well as the sunflower market. So right now, there's really not a move within the sunflower industry to move into this renewable fuels area. But that doesn't mean that the sunflower market won't be impacted and can't benefit from it. So let's think about, there's a direct impact and an indirect impact. The sunflower market is going to be an indirect impact. Right now, the primary use for sunflowers is really threefold. It's for crushing into the sunflower oil, which is obviously the connection into the renewable fuels market. We have the bird food market, as well as the human food market. And obviously we have confection sunflower, we have oilseed sunflower. I'm going to focus on the oilseed market specifically. So what is the indirect connection? Right now, the sunflower oilseed market is really focused on human food. It's on primarily frying. Okay, there is some from in the cooking market, but primarily for frying. A lot of it for, again, French fries, potato chips, other food products. So what's this connection? So let me think about the major, right now, soybean oil being the leader kind of in this renewable fuels area, the renewable for biodiesel as well as renewable diesel. So I just pulled a chart here. The blue chart is for soybean. Well, let me see now. I got to get my calculation. So the blue is for canola. So that's the canola futures in Canada. Now I haven't adjusted for exchange rates or converted. This is in metric ton. So it's Canadian dollars per metric ton. So just look at the connections or correlations between canola market and the soybean oil market. Now, as farm managers, we tend to sell into the soybean market, but this is really an oil play. It's the soybean oil that's going to be driving a lot of the soybean prices as we move forward. And that was something that Allison and I were talking about earlier. So there is a general correlation between canola because of the high oil content in canola. And the main reason we're growing canola is for the canola oil with the soybean oil market. It's not a perfect correlation. It's not a perfect relationship. There's things that go on in the soybean oil market that don't directly impact canola and vice versa. In my next slide, now let's think about the relationship between sunflower prices, canola prices, and the canola futures market. Okay, so sunflower, these are the spot market prices out of Cargill. I use the Cargill price because they crush and post prices not only for sunflower, but also for canola. So the black line is the spot market price for sunflower delivered to West Fargo. The blue is the spot market price for canola prices, canola delivered to West Fargo. And the red is the canola futures. Again, so very similar to the red, the blue line that we're seeing right here. Notice the correlation there. Notice the relationship. Pretty strong. Now, there are times that sunflower is at a premium to canola, and there's times that sunflower is at a discount to canola. Why is that? It's because of the end uses. It's also for the supply demand of this relative crop. So right now, if you think about what's going on in the sunflower market, we had a really big crop last year, actually a lot more sunflower than we had expected. And so the fact that the supply chain and the supply and availability of sunflower is higher than it is for the canola prices is making that, or the canola market is making that relative change. So even though they follow each other very closely, they have their own unique marketplaces. My point being, is there a move in the sunflower industry to go through the LCA analysis, the life cycle analysis, to get certified as a renewable fuel in the marketplace? Right now, there isn't an appetite for that. The sunflower industry is really focused on the human food side. That's really where the profit margins are. Humans will always pay more for products than energy will. So let's focus on that. Now, that doesn't mean that as we start to shift more of the oil seeds, soybean oil, canola oil into the renewable fuels market, that the sunflower market's somehow going to get left behind. It's certainly not. Because as we move more oil seed into the renewable fuels market, that leaves how do we backfill some of that oil demand for the human food market? So please understand, if you're a sunflower grower, this will impact you. It's not going to be a direct impact. It's going to be an indirect impact. And the linkages are a little bit loosey-goosey. So just because you start seeing something happen in the soybean oil market or something happening in the soybean market directly, it will have an impact on sunflowers, but there might be a delay, there might be a lag. So just be thinking about that as we move forward. So again, just to recap, I don't see sunflower oil being a really high target for the renewable fuels market because of the size and the volume of sunflowers produced. Although there is interest in it, there's some research going into, can sunflower oil be used in the renewable fuels markets because of that very high level of oil produced per acre. Okay, but we also have some rotation restrictions with sunflowers relative to soybeans. Soybeans you can do it every other year, sunflowers it's about every 4th year. So with that, I will finish my remarks. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions during the Q&A session. That's right.
All right, then we will go to Dennis Egan.
Flexibility is good. It's actually nice to meet you in person, Dennis. It really is my pleasure to introduce Dennis Egan, who's a civic and business leader, and obviously has been at the forefront of developing a project here in the region. And I'll turn it right over to you.
Sounds great. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good to be with everybody today. I thought what we would do is kind of talk about from the perspective of a crush facility and what we're hearing in the marketplace on the oil side, as well as giving you some texture in terms of what we're producing and the size of the crush facility. We're in Crookston. This was my home for a number of years. We transitioned for a number of reasons from Crookston to Grand Forks and are developing the project in Grand Forks. But from a regional perspective, same impact. We're going to be dealing with local growers in the region, primarily on the soybean side, as we continue to move this forward, especially looking at 42 million bushels of soybeans on an annual basis. A little bit about the geographic area, some of the things to be cognizant of. We've got the new crush facility that's being built just outside of Fargo. We've got the new one that should be coming online in Spiritwood, and then us being the third one in the region in terms of consumption of primarily soybeans. From a holistic standpoint, we've got a number of customers that we need to try to figure out how we're servicing them and what our product looks like in terms of from the farmer and the impacts that we're going to have on them, livestock producers, field producers, city, state, federal policymakers, and then equity investors. And we'll touch on each one of them really quickly. From a farmer, right, it is about the soybean right now. But as we shift and move and as demand grows for other oil seed, soft seeds, we need to be realistic in terms of helping setting expectations, especially for those renewable fuel individuals that we've been talking to. They're looking for something other than soybeans. And it's driving the California market with the CI score is what's driving all of it. And so some of the things to be cognizant of in terms of other oil seeds, the camelina, really, that's what we're hearing. A lot of the large renewable diesel players and the sustainable aviation fuel players saying, how do we grow that market? And what does that look like? And at the same time, not displacing what we've got with 160 million bushels of soybeans grown in the marketplace. And so how do we make this transition and how are we doing that? From the livestock producers, a lot of things, right? They're looking at the protein side primarily, but as we look to export the meal, what does that look like? Infrastructure on the West Coast isn't today what it needs to be in the future when all of the new crush facilities come online, and how are we managing that? And from a crusher, what are we doing internally to set ourselves up for the future of what this market is going to look like? Good news for us though, given geographically we're the closest meal producer from the Canadian hog industry. We've got a growing turkey industry in the northern marketplace. And then in North Dakota with the new legislation that was passed to help grow the livestock industry. So from a regional consumption side of it, when you've got 940,000 tons of meal being produced, what are we doing with it? How is that going? Good news for us is that we do have an offtake agreement in place for all of our soybean meal. But that also considers about 350,000 regional producers in which we think we've got a good shot at providing yield to. On the fuel side, this is what's driving it. That, I mean, right, it was talked about earlier, 5-6 years ago, everything on the crush side was being driven by the meal side of it. That has now spun and flipped on its head. Some say 60-40 oil, some say 50-50. What that looks like ultimately in the next 3 to 5 years, I think we're going to be looking at the really margins on the crush facilities are going to be continue to be driven by the oil side. But we're being asked to be flexible. We're being asked on a daily basis, are we going to be able to crush soft seeds? Where's the camelina? Where's the canola? And what does that look like for us? And so we're doing things internally to make sure that we're nimble and can handle whatever product comes in the door. But we've got to be cognizant, and we have to, as an industry, I think, help set expectations in terms of availability of some of these soft seeds and what that will look like in the renewable and SAF marketplace. You saw a map earlier. This is some of the renewable diesel, both existing and planned new ones in the country. And then one of our other customers that we have to be cognizant about is the city, state, federal policies. What's the impact on us from the permitting side of it? What's the impact from us from the CI scores and the seeds that we're growing and utilizing and crushing? But we also, as we look at what this market will do or won't do from a crush perspective, water resources. You know, you can't just put a plant up anywhere because of water, because of natural gas, because of that rail infrastructure. And so you start limiting where you can have new crush facilities, not just from geographically, but also where the seeds are being grown. Equity investors, another customer of ours, right? And they're looking for crush margins and their return. So that's the quick overview. Love to be able to get into the Q&A side and help share other additional information about from a crusher's perspective and what we're looking at and how we continue to be nimble in the marketplace, given all of the federal state policy that has a direct correlation and impact on profitability and the availability of whatever bean we're going to ultimately end up crushing.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jennifer Webster. I work on behalf of CHS, primarily doing canola origination that feeds our Hallock crush facility. My focus right now is primarily focused on originating seed from southern Manitoba. We also obviously source a lot of our seed from northern Minnesota and across North Dakota as well. Next slide. Okay, you can probably jump, yeah. So just a little bit about myself. I grew up on a livestock and grain farm in western Wisconsin. So really didn't know a lot about canola prior to joining CHS. I do have a bachelor's degree from University of Wisconsin River Falls, and from there I started my career at CHS just over 9 years ago. I spent a lot of time in Langdon, North Dakota, which is where one of our CHS facilities are. And I was able to kind of get a firsthand knowledge of what canola is, how it's used, and just the agronomics behind it. So over the course of the 9 years I have been at CHS, I've merchandised quite a bit of different commodities ranging from corn, soybeans, protein such as canola and soybean meal, and then as of recently, kind of getting back into canola seed origination. Next slide. Okay, so to just kind of get things kicked off a little bit, as you guys can see here, you know, in the year 2023, we've already kind of expanded capacity in general. But as you can see over the next, you know, going into 2025, you know, we are going to see that renewable diesel kind of come into more light than what we see it today. Next slide. Okay, so specifically talking about canola, as you guys can see here, a lot of the crush capacity for Canada is stacked on the western side versus the eastern side. So the primary crush plants that like I kind of pay attention to would be Altona and St. Agatha. Those are kind of the ones that kind of affect our farmers in our area in addition to us. So as you can see here, the ones that are kind of in the full shaded circles, those are the ones that are currently up and operational. The non-filled in circles, such as like Cargill, Louis Dreyfus, and Viterra, those have either been proposed or under construction and will be online in the coming years. So, next slide. So just taking it a step further, so canola crush expansion. Typically in years past, so like 2018, 2019, we saw about 50% of the canola crop go for exports and 50% of it used for crush. Over the course of the next couple of years, we are expecting to see that number increase, probably getting closer, maybe to 60, maybe even 70%. We did have a spike in 2021, as you can see by that red line. We kind of had a drought that year, so a lot of that canola went for crush instead of export. So as we work to increase the overall canola crush capacity, as well as percent that goes of production, we are going to have to see canola acres increase, as you can see kind of by the bar chart with the faded blue there. So a lot of things are going to have to increase on the canola front to if we're going to utilize canola for renewable diesel and biofuels in general. So lots of growth to do, but definitely doable in the next handful of years. Next slide. So to break down that graph a little bit on the supply and demand, so between the US and Canada, we typically produce we harvested acres wise, about 23 million acres, 2.5 or so in the US and 21 or so based in Canada. But as you can see, as I mentioned previously, like in the 2018-2019 year, you can see exports versus crush was about 50-50. But as we've progressed, an increased crush, we've obviously taken away from that export piece and really focused it on our crush capacity. But another thing to note too, if you look at the bottom of our ending stocks number, canola ending stocks continue to dwindle every year. So as of last year, just in Canada alone, it was about 6.4%. The US usually ends out its canola stocks at a net zero, just because a lot of it does get consumed in the crush industry. So for this year's crop specifically, we have heard a little bit, depending on the geographic area, but acres have been reported down a little bit slightly. So that ending stock number might dwindle here just a little bit here over the next year. But overall, I mean, this just kind of really repaints the picture that if we are going to expand that canola crush, we really do need to have those acres allocated to canola to fulfill our needs on the expanded crush side of things. Next slide. So obviously CHS is involved in the soybean crush side as well. So I just wanted to kind of touch a little bit on the bean side. Again, same kind of picture. Here we are in 2023. We have a lot of plants up and operational, but as you can see, as we progress into 2030 and 2035, a lot of the expected versus announced plants definitely are on the rise and on the increase. Next slide. So world oilseed output, I wanted to show this slide just in specifically over the course of the last year, specifically in large oilseed growing areas such as Argentina and Brazil, and even here in the US. Different parameters kind of presented itself where, the production was kind of at a loss, and, we saw a significant decline in Argentina specifically. Canola was able, across Ukraine and Australia, was able to kind of make up that difference. But again, we still need that oilseed capacity across the global picture in order to really kind of meet and exceed those needs in biofuels. Next slide. I threw this slide in there just because a lot of, before canola oil was approved for renewable fuels, a lot of our oil did go and has gone into the veg oil industry. So a lot of the question is, well, with increased expansion in the canola, will that get used into veg oil? And as you can see here, the demand for veg oil has actually excuse me, has actually stayed fairly stagnant over the last handful of years, and we expect that to kind of stay similar. So as the crush is expected to expand, a lot of that will probably go into biofuels and renewable diesel. Next slide. And I also want to show this just for legislation purposes across the West Coast, specifically California, Washington, and Oregon have passed legislation and that low carbon fuel standard footprint. It is proposed in Minnesota. So obviously if that does pass, that would be kind of a stepping stone for us on the renewable fuels pathway for our processing plants. Next slide. So renewable diesel estimated margins. So I threw this in there specifically in relation to the used cooking oil and the DCO, which is the gray and the kind of yellow dotted line there. So used cooking oil and DCO, which is distillers corn oil, which is derived from our ethanol plants. A lot of those can be purchased at a cheaper value to put into renewable diesel and biofuels. And as you can see, those stocks have actually started to dwindle off a little bit here. So, so again, that opens up a pathway for like canola oil and soybean oil to kind of be a key player in that going forward. Next slide. So other different announcements that, that have affected the industry and or affected CHS. Canola oil, obviously it was approved for renewable diesel back in December of 22. Over the course of the next couple of years, we are expected to see expansion in Canada, as I mentioned on the previous slide, be about 6 million metric tons. Schooler recently purchased a processing plant that has been pretty non-operational in the past. They're going to recommission that in 2024. Corteva, Bunge, and Chevron, they want to introduce a pilot winter growing canola program in the Mid-South. Obviously, the farther south you get, the agronomics get a little different. So you are able to seed canola and harvest it probably around this time. CHS and Hallock, we have actually taken winter variety canola before. It actually works pretty well because a lot of times this time of year, we are looking to bring more seed into our plant from elsewhere. And then expected next week, they updated EPA policy, RVO policy. So renewable volume obligation, for those of you who don't know what RVO is. So if the volumes change or if there's any additions to that, that would obviously affect how much oil we can put into the industry. Next slide. So how is CHS a part of this biofuel footprint based on what we know today? Next slide. So a little bit about our processing facilities. So we operate 3 crush plants in Minnesota, primarily focused around soybean and canola oil. And then we also have 2 ethanol plants in Anawan and Rochelle, Illinois. So just a few stats. So we have our two soy processing facilities are in Fairmont and Mankato, Minnesota. So between the 2 crush or soy plants, we produce about 7,000 tons of bean meal from over 300,000 bushels of beans processed daily. On the canola plant side in Hallock, a little bit smaller scale, produce about 300,000 tons of canola meal from over 450,000 tons of seed purchased annually. On the refining side, from our Mankato refinery specifically, we refine about 2 billion pounds of soybean and canola oil every year. And with our oil refinery expansion in Mankato, that number is probably going to increase in the coming couple of years. Our 2 ethanol plants in Anawan and Rochelle produce about 360,000 gallons of ethanol daily from 260,000 bushels of corn. And each ethanol plant produces about 1,200 tons of DDGs daily or 840,000 tons annually. Next slide. So briefly, just touching on CHS Hallock, we purchased the plant back in 2015. We crush about 1,400 tons daily and operate with about 55 employees. And as you can see, we do have a loop track that houses our meal and canola oil tankers. And we do also take in seed cars, typically around this time of year on occasion. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any or comments.
Questions? There's a couple.
If there are,
Yeah, please, I'll take them from the audience first, so.
Jennifer, what were the 3 locations you mentioned coming online in Minnesota?
So we have our crush plant in Hallock, Minnesota, which is primarily focused on canola. And then we have our 2 processing facilities in Mankato and Fairmont that crush soybeans.
Thank you. Next motion.
So I feel like it's been mentioned that like soybean acres would possibly have to increase for canola acres or sunflower acres depending on demand and like what is used for renewable energy. But are these crush facilities that are going in, are they able to make that transition from like this harder soybean seed to that soft seed without developing like an entirely new bit of infrastructure? Like, is it set up to withstand that?
I couldn't really understand the last part of the question. I'm sorry.
You want to repeat it?
Yeah, so I mean, the question is looking at alternative oil seeds and the demands for crush. And then Dennis, you mentioned that a little bit with the flexibility that you're looking at with your project.
Traditionally, there's a little bit of extra infrastructure you need on the front end to take instead of a soybean to be able to use other soft seeds. So the flexibility, some you're seeing talk about retrofitting existing plants. Some of the new ones are saying, how can we on the front end be a little more nimble and flexible in terms of positioning us to, or us specifically, position us to take other seeds over the long haul.
Okay, is soybean considered a soft seed?
You handle canola different than you handle soybeans or sunflower or camelina. So there's some things that you need to do and be prepared for from a process standpoint.
And just to touch briefly on that a little bit too, like there are switch plants that we work with specifically that, 1 week they'll crush canola, 1 week they'll crush soybeans. I mean, it's a whole different ballpark because canola is a lot smaller than a soybean. So the parameters for just like crushing it in general are different. Obviously, like in Hallock, I mean, I've asked the question, but I mean, it depends on the plant and the, and the funds and all that good stuff. But for us, like we don't operate as a switch plant just because it's, to it be interchangeable like that. I don't know if it really benefits CHS as a whole.
So right now, there's 2 in our region, there's kind of 2 switch plants or flip plants. One of them is the Cargill plant in West Fargo that is designed to be able to switch from one seed to another relatively quickly. The other one is the Enderlin plant that ADM owns in Enderlin, North Dakota. That can also has the ability to be able to switch relatively quickly between the different seeds. Most of the larger, the real big, large commercial plants like the one in Hallock or the ADM plant in Velva that are set up for canola, they usually just run commercial canola throughout the whole process. So there are a few plants that are designed specifically to be able to switch back and forth, but they tend to focus on some of the smaller, more specialized oils as a way to do that.
A kind of related question, and yeah, maybe Dennis too, if you're thinking about how fuel versus feed oil or fuel versus food oil might be a challenge if the fuel can contaminate the food oil.
Can you repeat that, David?
Yeah, so I think the question is regarding the characteristics of the oil and if they're differentiated at all.
It's really about the refining side of things and what's available on your campus. For us, we're doing degummed vegetable oil, which would need to be refined one more time. And so we're not going to do a separate refiner. A lot of the renewable diesel plants now are putting refining capabilities on the front end of their process. So for us to do that, it's about a $70 million infrastructure hit to do further refining it than what we're planning on. So we're only going to be today anyway, we're only going to be in the renewable diesel, SAF, biodiesel side of things.
A quick question for you, Frayne, and I think we do have bases covered, but just for you to verify. So we're talking about existing oil seeds, and we've spoken specifically about soybean canola, sunflower. There's obviously many more oil seeds we produce in the region, but they're really not on the map. Do you think there's any that even beg mention, or are they?
So the one that, I mean, for example, you have flaxseed, which is another one, or linseed oil, that's another, another oil seed that we can use as a lipid. The one that pops up periodically, and it was mentioned before, was camelina. And that, several years ago, there was a lot of interest in expansion of camelina, using that specifically for like aviation fuel. And I don't know all of the, I'm not a food scientist, I'm not an oilseed expert from a chemistry standpoint. There are some advantages to camelina, especially for some industrial uses as well as for sustainable aviation fuel, because of some of the characteristics it has. But again, that right now, from an acreage standpoint, I don't know that there's more than 1,000 acres of camelina grown in the whole United States. So it would take a pretty large infrastructure change and development from not only agricultural producers to be able to grow the crop, but then in the infrastructure to be able to handle it, to be able to process it, to be able to get into the system. And so when we look at the relative size, just to give some people some numbers, if we take all the sunflower acres that we grow in the United States times 2, you get about the size of the US canola industry. You take the US canola industry times 10, that's about the size of the Canadian canola industry. You take the Canadian canola industry times 10, that's about the size of the US soybean industry. And so when we look at the volumes that are required for renewable fuels and the size of the industry for fuel consumption, right now we're looking at the path of least resistance tends to be the soybean market, just because we have the available crush industry, we have the supply chain already developed. It's just a matter of diverting some of that supply chain. Now, as we move forward, as we look into the future, that may change depending upon how rapidly this all comes and what specifically different oil seeds can provide into that energy market.
I think that's a great place to transition to our next panel. So thank you all.
Right.
We'll revisit questions at the end as well. All right, Matt Levitt and the Emerging Oilseeds presentation panel, feel free to join me up on stage. Matt Levitt is the agronomy lead for the University of Minnesota's Forever Green initiative as a part of the commercialization, adoption, and scaling team. So ding, ding, ding to the last question. How are we going to do this? And prior to joining Forever Green, he worked for about 10 years at Albert Lee Seeds.
Thank you. Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks, everybody. Last speaker really set up my presentation very well about, we've kind of discussed what the oilseed potential is of existing crops, but what's kind of on the horizon moving towards the future. And not only that, but can we get outside of the paradigm of kind of selecting between food and fuel uses with some of these new and emerging oilseeds that kind of take the place of not competing with full season crops like soybean, sunflower, etc. So I'm going to focus a little bit, kind of set the table on camelina and pennycress, some new and developing crops that we're developing at the University of Minnesota, and then kind of hand it over to the commercialization side to give a little bit more context there. Just as a very brief background on what Forever Green is. Forever Green is a consortium at the University of Minnesota of R&D efforts, and then bolstering commercialization efforts on the back end. And really the whole focus is maximizing ecosystem service potential, keeping brown soil covered by focusing on perennial and winter annual cropping systems. So we're getting the benefits of cover crops, but with some economic benefit at the back end. So that's really a benefit to farmers, both from a cover crop and ecosystem services potential, but also for the industry itself that's more heavily focused on quantifying carbon benefits, ecosystem service benefits, which will probably, we think is going to be much more important as we move forward here. And I'm not going to spend any time on this. I think we're all aware of what the downfall is of focusing on traditional summer annual agriculture. There's a lot of leaky systems there, lost nutrients, lost soil, lost water, contaminated drinking water, and really our perennial and winter annual cropping systems are designed to really plug these holes and maximize the benefits. Moreover, what we're really developing these oil seeds for long-term is to play really nicely with a crop like soybeans. So potentially a farmer could plant a winter oil seed and plant either a soybean after it or a soybean into it and kind of capture two harvestable crops in one season essentially. So that's kind of the whole framework of what we're talking about here. And Forever Green has about 16 to 17 crops in our portfolio. The winter oil seeds are one portion of that. So winter camelina, if you're not familiar with it at all, it's a brassica, just like canola. It produces very small seeds, about 400 to 500,000 seeds per pound. But it yields very well, and the oil content relative to things like soybeans is very high. So I think I saw some numbers earlier, but from our standpoint, it's probably 36 to 42% oil. And it makes a very good feedstock for the renewable diesel and biofuel industry, mainly because it's more stable. You don't have to keep it at temperature to be used in the aviation industry and other biofuel uses. It's also an edible oil. So, you know, food use oil right now is pretty limited for camelina, but long-term, I think that's definitely a benefit. It also produces pretty decent meal for animal feed. And I think kind of an undersold benefit of camelina and pennycress is its pollinator habitat potential. Again, drawing back to that ecosystem service potential of crops like this. And kind of what's new and emerging from the pipeline at the University of Minnesota. We've got a postdoc breeder here, Dr. Matthew Ott, who's been working on early maturing lines of camelina. And that's mainly to kind of deal with the vagaries of our northern cropping system. So to push that maturity earlier, so we can double crop, we can relay crop without, you know, a less of a yield penalty on a soybean crop following that crop. And we're probably, you know, close to commercial release, I think it's fair to say, on that variety. So that's kind of what's coming out of the pipeline. The other cool thing about winter camelina is it's very hardy in our climate. You know, for oil seeds, you have to plant them more or less on time. So you do have to be kind of diversified. You have to have you know, a small grain, a sunflower, some other crop in rotation, silage corn to really fit these crops in and plant them on time. But as a cover crop alone, I mean, you can plant them very late. So that alone has a lot of people looking at camelina, not only as an oil seed, but as a cover crop as well. And I think, you know, in the short term, there's going to be a lot of market opportunities for folks planting, you know, camelina and pennycress as a cover crop for corn soybean agriculture. Another one that's a little bit farther off in the pipeline is pennycress. Again, it's a winter. It's actually a domesticated weedy species. So everybody's familiar with pennycress. They probably, you know, you've seen it in your fields. You know, most of the time, if you talk to a group of farmers about pennycress, they're going to start shuddering in fear. But this is a domesticated species. So, you know, the pace of breeding now, and with our new technologies, we can take a crop like pennycress, integrate out all the bad components. So it's shattering, it's weediness, it's dormant seeding, you know, high amounts of anti-nutritional acids and oils, and really move this crop into a potential where it's in a commercially viable state. You know, again, it produces small oil seeds. It's high yielding. It has high oil content. And again, it's really seeing a big benefit in kind of that, not only cover crop seed market, but the industrial oil, less so the human food component, which is more in development. But it's kind of long-term, that's the trajectory for that. And again, pollinator habitat is a big, you know, probably undersold benefit of this particular crop. So where does this go? Well, the domestication traits have already been identified in this crop. So we've moved a long way in a short amount of time, reducing the weediness of this crop. So reducing the shatter ability, you know, leading to ease of harvest from a farmer perspective, expanding the harvest window. We're lowering that seed fiber component, so kind of selecting for yellow seeded varieties that don't lie on the soil for decades and grow when you don't want them to. It also leads to, you know, increased utilization on a livestock feeding component as well, if you have those yellow seeded type varieties, and reducing the anti-nutritional components that are not good for humans and animals. So uric acid and glucosinolates specifically. So those have all been identified. They're moving forward in our breeding programs and are also in commercial release too, which we'll hear about in a little bit. You know, continued varietal improvement on things like pennycress is, again, like camelina, we're trying to expand early maturity, kind of making it more adaptable to our northern climates, get it to mature earlier so we can follow it up with another crop or plant another crop into it. Breeding for high oleic oil, where it has similar oil profile to canola, and other things, that would matter from an agronomy perspective. So larger seed size, higher oil content, higher protein, et cetera. So I've kind of danced around this a little bit, but I'll kind of mention what our main thinking is with these oil seeds. Again, going back to the whole goal of capturing ecosystem services on the farm and plugging these brown soil periods that we have in the upper Midwest, which we have a lot of. Essentially we're having green soil coverage about 3 or 4 months out of the season, and the rest is dead and dry. So the whole goal with this would be to plant an oil seed in the fall. It overwinters, and at that time you could either plant, wait till the whole crop matures and plant a soybean after it, or you relay crop a soybean into this existing oil seed crop, which is kind of detailed here in the pennycress research. And you can either seed it in terms of drilling soybean directly into it, or doing like a skip row system, where you're leaving blank rows of the oil seed and then planting soybeans right into it. You harvest the oil seed off the top, the soybean grows through, and you get 2 harvestable crops in 1 season, essentially. And this is a slide from Dr. Ruskesh, who's in the audience here, so forgive me if I miss anything, but the whole, on balance, you are having a yield reduction on your soybeans, but if you account for the small seeded oil seed, the pennycress, the camelina, your total yield of seed goes up and your total percentage of oil goes up, relative to just your monocrop soybeans. So that's the difference. You're gaining ecosystem service benefits, and it's higher economic return at the back end. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Ratan Chopra, who leads trait discovery and deployment at CoverCress, which is commercializing and has commercial varieties of pennycress on the landscape right now. And if you're not familiar, CoverCress is a St. Louis, Missouri startup company that's converted pennycress into CoverCress. So take it away.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to skip a few slides because Allison and Matt did a great job of introducing some of the challenges that we have ongoing with, greenhouse gas production, and we heard a lot about what soybean demand is increasing, and just one thing I want to highlight that, if we want to meet the demand, like just this year itself, BMO is projecting about 8 billion pounds of soybean oil more that's needed. So if you kind of continue in that scale, you'll need 9 million more acres of soybean in the future to meet this demand. So, you also heard about alternative crops this morning, about like there's various crops that are being introduced to meet the demands of renewable diesel, and CoverCress provides one of those opportunities. And I really think, and we believe at CoverCress, that there is a need of multiple crops. CoverCress will provide one of those solutions, but you really need camelina, carinata, all to come at play, because you can see the demand is a lot, and with the policies and hopefully what EPO declares in the next week, that's going to change the landscape quite a bit. So what is CoverCress? CoverCress is a domesticated version of pennycress. Matt highlighted some of the features. It's a yellow seed grain. It's been a decade of research efforts with the university partnership and CoverCress, and we've got rid of the weediness characteristics, and that's what was the major headache for farmers to grow this as a crop. And there's a lot of benefits. Again, I'll just kind of reiterate, it can provide cover crop benefits by reducing nutrient leaching. You can leverage off-season ground. I know in northern Midwest, like upper Midwest, it's really hard to plant it early and harvest it early. But as you start going in Illinois, central Illinois, southern Illinois, or Indiana, you can plant it in September, and you can really get a double cropping going. And then it really provides farmers an opportunity to make extra money on their farm. And us at a CoverCress, with our agreements with offtake agreements with Bunge and Chevron, we are able to kind of provide like a controlled and we are able to mitigate risk for farmers so that the adoption of cover cress can happen. More attributes about cover cress, again, the oil can range between 30 to 35%, depending on the area that you grow. It's highly influenced by the environment. The meal has got good protein, very similar to canola meal. It could be used in different industry. There's some regulatory requirements that need to be met in the near future. As you go south, you can produce up to 2,000 pounds per acre as well. So, and we look at marketing this crop as a non-feed fuel feedstock, and we're not looking for food industry necessarily in the near term. And the way we see this, we've got like 50 sites of experience now. We know when to plant it, what are the methods of planting that we want to recommend to farmers. We have a farmer handbook where we kind of recommend what needs to be done prior to planting this crop. What do we want to see in October to see a good establishment, and then we make our recommendations in the month of March for what kind of fertility that needs to be applied. If it's viable, then only we recommend applying fertilizer, and then we harvest the crop by end of May or first week of June. This year was slightly earlier, simply because it was really dry and things moved very quickly. In terms of business model, the way we see cover cress being marketed is we secure our contracts with our downstream customers, and then we provide the cover cress grain to farmers. They grow it on contract basis, and then that grain is kind of more purchased back, moves to grain handlers. And we are looking at a couple of markets, crush market that you heard about, and then there is a feed market. Initially, we are targeting chicken feed simply for the scale. For crush markets, you really need large acres, and also you heard about all the assets coming up in southern part of the US, and those facilities, until they get up and running, we have to just have a market to keep the cover cress scaling up and running. But like any other crop, any new crop, you start introducing, agencies have new regulations, you start thinking about it, and that's what we are facing today. We're working with USDA, EPA, and FDA, trying to figure out what are the challenges of bringing this crop. How do we make sure it, when it enters the supply chain, how do we make sure we comply with EPA rules, FDA rules? Lots of work going on. We routinely meet with these agencies and try to make sure that when we go to full scale in 26, 27, we comply with all of these agency rules. And we firmly believe with the strategic partnership that we have today with Bayer on the farmer side, and midstream with Bunge for crush assets, and then downstream renewable diesel, we feel like we have the expertise that we need in the value chain to make this as a viable crop. In terms of scaling and product, as I already mentioned, there's a lot of addressable market that this crop has the potential to grow, but we are primarily focusing in the area that's highlighted in the green. It's hard to see. That's about 30 million acres, and what we want to see is, can we address the 10 million acres in the near term? And primary target would be just to get to 3 million acres by 2032 to 2035. It takes time to kind of get the farmer adoption going, and then crush assets needs to be there. So yeah, I'll wrap up there. Sorry. Yeah. So and we just think about how do we. So we feel good about where we are from a commercial standpoint. We had about 8,000 demo acres last fall planted, to get the farmers experience how to plant this grain, how does it look in the fall, how does it look in early spring, and then we kind of, because of the regulations that we have today with the EPA, we had to destroy those plots. But this fall we are looking at about 3,000 acres for commercial harvest, and then we'll have another 7,000 to 8,000 demo acres. Again, we want farmers to really kind of get the feel for what this crop looks like. How does it feel to handle it? How does it fit in their planters? What kind of adjustment do they need to do in their combine? We don't think they'll need to change a lot of their existing equipment, but there might be some changes that, you know, as we are growing it at a large scale, we are learning things, we are trying to recommend, we are working. It's almost like a hand holding of farmers. And it's a nice experience because for us to learn what's going on in farmers field, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we have the founding farmer that will kind of, you know, spread the message and help us scale this crop.
All right, next we have Darren Greenfield, who's the Senior Director of Seed Operations at Yield 10. And he's been involved in the canola industry for about 20 years or more in Canada, and joined Yield 10 in 2022 to help commercialize their camelina varieties. So take it away.
Thank you. So I'm an agronomist by training, so I'll probably focus a little bit more on that side of it. But I will talk a bit about who Yield 10 is and where we see camelina as a fit in the up and coming oilseed, especially biofuels. So we are a biotech company, but by basis. So our expertise initially was in sort of gene editing and doing that sort of things. And we're working at trade added and value added things, such as adding things like omega-3 and PHA. But along the lines, we've been also looking at camelina and looking at how we can try to improve camelina and the agronomics to make it a better fit for farmers, which then also makes it a better fit for the biofuel industry as a consistent feedstock. Camelina, you know, naturally has some good things like in its frost tolerance and things like that. But that's, you know, that's kind of where we're going. We're trying to improve the lines so that we can make it a better fit for the farming industry, which then also makes it a better fit for the end user. So when we think about that, you know, we're working very closely with like the University of Minnesota, but we've also been able to develop some of our own genetics that we're quite proud of, and we are actually out there doing commercial acres with right now. So one of our lines, one of the breeding targets has been to produce winter lines that are much more winter hardy than what was kind of conventionally out there. Not that the ones that are out there were bad, we just want to try and improve on that. So what we've got is one of our lines, which is called WDH2, which is very winter hardy. So we've been doing trialing, and I'm just going to take that as an opportunity to introduce another person in the crowd here is Dr. Julian Keith, who runs our trialing program. And he has trials everywhere from, you know, basically south of Arizona or southern border of Arizona to central to northern Alberta. So we've got, you know, we're trying varieties in a wide range of wide range of different climates. This is a WDH2 field that's currently growing in southern Alberta. So very cold winters, very dry, very challenging conditions because we don't have a consistent snowpack. So probably when it comes to a winter crop, it's probably the worst case scenario you could ever have. And it does very well under these conditions. So that's some of the things that camelina can bring to a grower is its winter survivability, and it's also flexibility. So it can, you know, ideally you get the crop going and you get it started, you know, you're planting it so that it's well established as it goes into winter, you overwinter that way. But we've also found that you can also run your planting later. You lose some of the benefits of the cover crop and ground cover benefits, but it's a crop that will still survive in that situation and produce a crop the following year. So there's some big advantages that way. Similar to the University of Minnesota, we're also trying to develop lines that fit into the relay cropping scenario, so shorter seasons. So we've also got another line that we're working on called WDH3, that is about 1 week shorter. We're also working on other characteristics to make it, you know, more profitable for growers, so increasing yield, increasing seed size, increasing oil content, and things like that. All to try and drive and move towards that. So, you know, I've also got this WDH2 planted not too far away from here. We've got a couple hundred acres of it planted in southern Manitoba, almost actually right up into the Ear Lake area. And it was planted this last year a bit on the late side. What I would say, you know, we started mid to late September, we actually got into October, and it actually overwintered very well under those conditions. And those crops actually look excellent going into this season. You know, from a growing point of view, so, you know, one of the things that we're looking for, you know, as, you know, they mentioned with pennycress is, you know, it's got to fit with the farmers. There's got to be something that they can do without doing a lot of investment. Some of the nice things about camelina is that, you know, you don't need to go get specialized equipment for this. You don't need new equipment. You can use basically whatever you're using to do any other small grains on the farm. Planting rates, you know, are 5 to 6, which is very similar to canola if you're, you know, if you're used to that kind of crop. Planting depth, you want to keep it very shallow. One of the big advantages to camelina over, say, canola, when you look at it as a carbon feedstock for the biofuel industry, is its reduced fertility requirement. So that means it takes less carbon to produce this crop. So it gets a much lower carbon intensity score, which makes it then a more valuable biofuel feedstock. So this is creating a lot of interest for end users, you know, that want to use this, because then they need less of it to meet the carbon intensity requirements of places like California, Oregon, and things like that. So it's these reduced fertility costs, being able to do a crop that's out of cycle with regular oilseed production, and that helps it and all of these things. It makes it a very interesting biofuel feedstock. And with that in mind, you know, not only are we working on the genetics, but we're also working on making sure that there is a home or an end use for this. So we are creating relationships with, you know, if you followed us on the internet, you'd see that we have LOIs with Marathon Fuels, with American Airlines. We're also working on a few other ones as well. We recently just signed one with Mitsubishi as well. And this is all about making sure that not only we're improving the genetics and improving the varieties, but also making sure that there is a pull for the camelina. So it's been mentioned too that camelina has been grown, has been tried in the past. And that was part of the challenge, is it grew very well for growers. They really liked it, but they didn't like the fact it sat in their bins and it didn't move for a few years. And they didn't get paid for it. That's something they didn't like, which nobody would. So we're making sure that not only are we making sure that we're trying to improve the genetics, but we're making sure that there is a end market for it, and there's a pull. Unfortunately, right now, the way things are, most of these companies are saying, you know, we'll take as much as you can make as quickly as possible. The challenge is we, you know, very similar to what we were just hearing. We want to do this slowly so that we can make sure that we're a good fit in the areas that we are at and things like that. One of the challenges with camelina right now is weed control. There's no over-the-top broadleaf weed control for camelina. So this is one of the things we're working on. So we're working on herbicide tolerance for camelina. There are some options out there. You can use epiduralin, which would be like sonolin in this area, and some other things like that. Fortunately, you can control grassy weeds in the crop as well. You know, there are a few options out there. One of the nice benefits that was pointed out by Matt earlier is you know, it is a great pollinator source. And the other nice thing about it is there's not really any bugs, like there's flea beetles, ligus, cabbage pod weevil, all these ones that affect canola don't seem to like camelina. So big advantage, farmers aren't spraying. Second advantage, if you're not spraying, you're also not killing beneficials. You also have an excellent pollinator habitat that's earlier than a lot of other pollinator sources. So falling back on my canola experience, I worked with pollinators quite a bit in the past, and they were always looking for an early source. So now they're starting to see these fields that are flowering in late May, and they're kind of excited, especially when you see all these bees out there. And I know from walking them, there's lots and lots of bees in there, so that's really good. And less herbicide and less pesticide use is also a benefit, because then the farmers aren't doing as many passes over the field. We're not using as many chemicals and pesticides. So there's just lots of benefits that outside of just, you know, the economics, so what they can make per acre. The other advantage of camelina is it really doesn't seem to be susceptible with things like sclerotinia. Some to extent. The one that we found that have the most economic impact is downy mildew. So it's something to watch for in sort of these geographies where you've got a bit more moisture. But as you sort of move to the west and get into the drier climates, it becomes less of a concern and issue. I'm running out of time here, so quickly. So yields, you know, we're looking at that 24 to 30 bushels, and that's probably fairly conservative. No special equipment. You know, it is a bit of a challenge to combine things like that. With the winter varieties, you know, in this area, you know, we should be in that late June, early July under a normal year. This year they're going to be a little bit later, so you know, cooler spring, things like that. And you know, right now, because we're in that sort of chicken and egg stage where, you know, we're small enough acres that it's a challenge for the large crush facilities to sort of do a run of something specific like camelina. Which then makes it harder to contract. And so we're taking care of the contractor. We're gonna be the market. We're gonna buy the grain from the growers that grow it for us. So we do 100% offtake contracts with growers, and we take care of shipment from the farm. So that's to help us to build this so that once we get it large enough that we are in this, you know, we can be a run of these large plants, then at that point it would become a commodity crop and we can start to move on to that sort of thing. We're also trying to keep the seed cost relatively low so that it's, you know, not a large impact or, you know, cost to the grower that way as well. Take them out of time. So if you want more interest or information, you know, you can always reach out to us. Through poultry line, or we've got lots and lots of information on our website as well. You can reach us there.
All right, and finally, for this panel, we've got Harry Stanislawski, who is the Business and Industry Development Director for AURI.
All right, thank you. I guess I get to kind of wrap up this panel talking a little bit about hemp. AURI has been working on hemp for quite a while, ever since really 2016, when we were able to start working with it as a experimental, you might say, and then in 2018, when the Farm Bill came, then we were able to really get involved and engaged. And in hemp, it's been kind of a rocky road in this crop, largely because there's a tendency to have a lot of over exuberance in the crop. And we quickly overproduced a compound that you all know as CBD. And I think they're still kind of working through some of that. But what I'm going to focus on mostly today is a little bit about our approach to building an industrial hemp industry in Minnesota that deals with kind of two areas that we like to focus on, and that's the food and the fiber side. And I've been involved more in the fiber side recently because that seems to be where a lot of the interest is right now. But a little bit about AURI, compared to my colleagues here, we don't do anything with agronomy and fertilizers and pesticides and anything like that. We wait until they get it all done, and we look at the crop and we see how we can add value to it at the end of the day. And it's really a gratifying thing. Because one of the things I'm going to share with you here is in the hemp space in Minnesota, if you don't have infrastructure to actually deal with the crop for both food and fiber, you're kind of really limited as to how this crop takes off at the end of the day. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think are some positive things that are going on that might fix that. But a little bit on the hemp seed oil market, there are many, many sources out there that tell you about where hemp is going and how it's going to grow and so forth. There's a lot of market research companies out there, but most of them are fairly optimistic on hemp and say that the market is going to grow at compounded annual growth rates anywhere between 5 and upwards of 10% or more, is what they are. And then, you know, another important thing to get a crop commercialized and so forth is, like it or not, if the USDA is involved in it, it legitimizes the crop. And the USDA just this year, they started putting out their National Weekly Hemp Report. This is good news for an emerging industry because it legitimizes the crop, it puts more information in the marketplace, and just some numbers here that they put out on the hemp industrial value, about 238 million, the open value about 212, and then those growing under roof about 26.1 million. And in addition to that, what they do is, this is really interesting information to me in the value added business, is that they actually publish retail weekly advertised prices for hemp ingredients. And in this case, we're talking about oil, protein, the hemp parts, the seeds, all the rest of it. What is it selling for in terms of per package, per ounce, and kind of where it's going. And as this information gets developed, we can start developing forecasts and all the rest of the information that's useful when you look at putting business plans together. The Department of Agriculture has done its work. I mean, ever since 2016, they can tell us the percent that was planted for grain, CBD, CBG, and fiber. All of that is happening, as well as the acres. And as you look at in 2022, the acres fell only to 375 acres in Minnesota, and you go, wow, that's not much of a deal left here, is it, compared to, 7,000 some acres just back in 2019. But I can tell you here in 2023, we will more than double the 375 already, just because of some of the fiber plants that we're working with right now that could develop into full-fledged processing plants. So I think that's good news on the fiber side. And, these ingredients on the food side, the hemp seed, the toasted whole hemp seed, the protein and oil, we've worked with them all. They all have a place in the marketplace with some benefit. A lot of it is omegas and things like that. In the case of the powders, you've got a protein that's non-allergenic and non-GMO. So, those are some of the benefits that it brings to the table. And if you look at all of the products that have been developed here, from breads to tarts to snack foods to milk and such, there have been plenty of innovators out there in the hemp that have brought something to the table. Some have succeeded more than others. I was really excited about the hemp beer. I thought that was going to really kick off, and the old hemper kind of disappeared, went off the map, even though I thought it was a pretty good tasting beer. But I'm told that the craft folks might bring that back a little bit later. So hemp in the region in the USA, what are we doing that we think we can bring some of the market back? We are working on erosion control studies with hemp fibers right now with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. They are putting out a trial this year. If you're from Minnesota and you travel I-94 in Albertville, where they have their big MnDOT transportation center, the hemp mats will be installed there, I think, next week. And they'll be put on slopes and so forth. And if you've ever had a chance to work with MnDOT, there's a lot that goes into this with specifications and slopes and so forth as they measure the effectiveness of these erosion control products. And then they spec it. Once it gets spec'd, then it can be purchased by the Department of Transportation. How big is that market? Well, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, just in the erosion control markets, would take about 20,000 acres of hemp if we were to fully get into that market, which includes the mats, the logs, and then the hydro mulch. That's a pretty big market. Now, we won't get all of that because there's some other things that work better than hemp in certain situations, particularly wood products like Curlex out of Wisconsin and so forth. That's made from the ash trees out there. The fiber processing plant investigations. Today, we expect a building permit on our first fiber plant in Minnesota. This will be located in central Minnesota. That's all I'll say for now. And it will have the capacity at some point to at least process 5,000 to 10,000 acres of hemp into basically construction grade type of products for the construction industry. Insulation, hempcrete type panels for construction and so forth. And we're excited about that because that's what the doctor ordered in hemp. You have to have those kinds of things in order to get going. In addition to that, we've been working with the architects. The architects have a lot to say about what happens and whether they like it or not. And we are working with architects who have said, we want to see more of this in the marketplace and so forth. And we are doing LCAs on the hemp side as it relates to the construction part of the business. Hempcrete housing demonstrations, we did do a couple of them in Fargo with kind of little, what do you call those places you stay and rent? Not B&Bs, but they're just little house demonstrations right downtown Fargo.
Tiny homes?
Yeah, tiny homes. And they are tiny. I can barely fit in here, but, they're cool. We put hemp walls in them, we put hemp insulation in them. They've done some things, and now the developer in that project has told me they want to build a full-fledged house this time, something closer to 1,200 square feet, on this, but these hemp panels will make it a lot easier, because if you use in situ construction, which means mixing the hempcrete right on site and then waiting for it to dry, nobody's got time for that. That just takes too much time. Feed approvals, we've been working on hemp feed approvals. The industry has for a long time. For almost 3.5 years, we've been trying to get hemp meal approved in laying hens. I was just got off my report this morning, and they said 31 more days before the 180-day period runs out with the FDA, where they have to act on the third and what I think is going to be the final proposal to the FDA on getting feed approved. That's it's quite a process, folks. That's all I can say. And you can get old watching this. It's like paint drying. But some states don't have the patience for it any. States like Texas and Montana, they approved hemp for certain feeds for horses and chickens and such in their states outside of the FDA after approval. So patience is running thin. This just a couple of examples, okay, of the insulation projects and what these hemp homes look like. A little bit on the erosion control products. Here they are. This is at the research station in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. We were there as we were starting to test these. And talk to me after the deal. I can tell you how that works and just how head scratching of a situation this really is to get these things done. So what's the future here? I think infrastructure investment is needed for hemp fiber mostly, but it's coming. We're working on 2 projects in Minnesota that we think will bear fruit. I was told in South Dakota, there'll be 2 groundbreakings or openings of facilities there. So that looks good. For you agronomists, we need more information on fiber and grain. We don't have enough information on how much fiber we can get out of these varieties. And that causes everybody to be a little anxious and risky about, just what are we going to end up with at the end of the day. So, and we always say at AURI, the supply chain must be in sync with the value chain. No sense raising something that we don't have a market for. So we're very, very cautious with all of that. But as these things start to come together, and as we live in a bio-based world, it looks like hemp's got a good shot. So we'll stop there. Thank you.
We're ahead by about 2 minutes, so I'm just going to ask the 2 questions that we have in the audience because they were for these panelists, and then we'll move into our grower panel. So the first question is, what is the range for winter camelina? Where is it grown in the US currently?
So currently, the target range that we're really looking at is Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. We're also doing work in Idaho and Montana as well, but we do also see a good fit for it in areas like Kansas and Texas, as well as an alternate crop for continuous cropping in those areas as well.
Okay, and then our second question, this might also be for you, but I'm going to open it to Ratan to do pennycress and winter camelina. What are the conditions that make planting in the fall a go, no go? So you said you planted later than expected, but was there a rainfall that happened that helped that establishment? Like, what are the conditions you're looking for?
Well, for pennycress or cover grass, it's moisture. You need that 3/4 of an inch of moisture in the fall after you plant, and then you can go.
And how long before frost do you want to get them in the ground?
We plant about 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, great. All right. We will come back to questions at the end of our program again, but we'll keep it moving for now. So Russ, Gash, Ann, and Jared, would you please join me at the front for our grower panel? As a quick introduction, Russ has been busy this week. Actually, he works at the USDA ARS, and they had a field day in Morris yesterday. So we're kind of swapping events today. But Russ is a research plant physiologist at the USDA's Agriculture Research Service and North Central Soil Conservation Research Laboratory in Morris, Minnesota. That is more of a mouthful than my job title.
Soils lab. Everybody just calls it the soils lab. Yeah.
He's got over 30 years of research experience. His program focuses on the physiology and agronomy of new and alternative oilseed crops with the goal of increasing the diversity, efficiency, and economic returns of cropping systems in the northern US while protecting the environment. Take it away.
Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah.
We just using the computer to switch slides?
Yep, you can just click next, or we've got this clicker too. Where is it with them?
Let's see the computer. So yeah, we're gonna, we've heard a lot about business aspect of oil seeds and crushing and so on, and some on agronomics too. And so for this session, we're gonna get the grower's perspective of growing oil seeds, and I believe crushing oil seeds as well too. I was gonna introduce winter camelina and talk a little bit about the agronomics of this system. It is a way to produce camelina and still be able to produce soybean or some other food and oilseed crops too. But Matt did a very good job of covering that, and Darren as well covered some of what I'm going to talk about. So we'll be able to shorten things up considerably. I don't know how much of this I'm going to show. Yeah, it was already mentioned, you know, camelina is a good feedstock source for both biofuels, and it can be used for food uses as well. And bioproducts, bioplastics and things like that. Yield 10, I believe, is interested in some of that as well. Matt covered the cropping system that we're using. Actually, if I go to, yeah, we'll go back to this. But yeah, the primary way we're fitting these winter oil seeds into cropping systems is using them in a dual use system where we're producing two crops on the same piece of ground in the same year, or three crops over 2 years. And Matt has already talked about this. As far north as we are, the system that has worked best for us is this relay system, which he already mentioned. As we move a little bit further south in the Corn Belt, double cropping works well also, because the winter camelina finishes out early enough to be able to grow soybean crop as a double crop. And there's some other crops that work well also. This just kind of gives a little bit of a timeline of how we're using the relay system. Following a relatively short summer season crop like spring, some of the small grain, spring wheat, oats, silage works well, silage corn, because that comes up early enough. But trying to get that seed in by mid-September, mid to late September, and it can be, I think Darren already pointed this out, it can be planted later. It's extremely winter hardy and survives our winters quite well. And then in the spring, at a near normal time, we're coming into in the relay system, interseed or plant soybean into the standing winter camelina. And this can be done right up to when the plants are bolting. When they begin flowering, which doesn't occur too long after bolting, then it gets a little bit too late. We start seeing some yield loss in the camelina then. But at bolting stage, you go out there and plant this stuff, you know, you'll see some flattened plants there. You come back the next day, they're upright, they're growing fine. So we don't see any yield loss planting at bolting. And then of course, after at the time that we're harvesting, the soybean's still short enough, we can go over the top of that soybean, harvest the camelina, and then of course, harvest the soybean later. And again, a very important point, and Matt already made this, I think is one of the most important points, is that it's a system where we can produce a lot more oil per acre. A lot of these crush facilities, it's oil per acre that they're really interested and concerned about. And we can do this with this type of system. With some of the newer varieties, there's one that Matthew's identified that's earlier than the winter camelina that we've been doing for most of our agronomic work. It's about a week to 2 weeks earlier. Last year, we began doing a double cropping study with that. And I don't know if you guys remember, last year was
our growing season was pretty short. We're about 150, I'm about 150 miles south of Crookston in Morris, Minnesota. And we saw really good yields of it. This is double crop. So we double crop sunflower, dry bean, dry edible beans. That's big around the Morris area, and also millet. Dry bean and millet as a double crop did fantastic. They did as good as the monocrop coming in at a normal time. After a fallow winter, there was no camelina planted there. Sunflower took a little bit of a hit, about a 20% decline in the double crop, but it made it to full maturity. But sunflower uses more water. And we were measuring soil moisture in this experiment too. And there was not much different in the dry bean and the millet. There was not that much difference in soil moisture between the double crop treatment and the monocrop, you know, coming in after being fallow during the winter. But sunflower did use more, well, the amount of water that left in there after the winter camelina, the sunflower used more water. So it didn't do quite as well, but still did well and finished out good. So there are some, with these newer, earlier maturing winter varieties, we can even do double cropping this far north in Minnesota. And again, I'm a little bit further south than you guys. I do work with cooperators at NDSU, and you know, we've pushed the limit. We've done relay and even some double cropping as far north as Prosper. I think is probably as far north as we've got, but it works even there. And so with that, I'm just going to clone. It didn't fully show up, did it? But what we're targeting right now for, or I think what we should be targeting. In terms of, you know, where to establish winter camelina, these systems, we're really looking at small grain growers because that's worked very well to come in. You know, we have enough time and big enough planting window to come in and direct drill winter camelina after like spring wheat or oats I mentioned. Silage corn is another one. A lot of silage corn grown in Minnesota, about 400,000 acres. Wisconsin, I think about that much, even a little bit more. So there is a lot of acreage there. In Minnesota, spring wheat, about 1.5 million acres. So there's good potential looking at those grounds too. Coming in after dry beans is another good option with winter camelina. So with that, I'm going to introduce our other speakers. I think that's all I really wanted to show. Yeah. So our first speaker is Ann Schweigel. Okay. Yeah. I never get that right, so sorry. Yeah, that's okay. But so Ann and her husband, Peter, they own and operate a diversified grain and livestock operation near Browns Valley in Big Stone County, just west of Morris, in fact. What, about 40 miles? 40 miles, yeah, 40 miles west. So they're neighbors. They manage nearly 400 acres and grow certified organic corn, soybeans, small grains, and kerns, as well as operating a small pastured pork operation. And prior to returning home, Ann earned her bachelor's degree in geography at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, and worked in the field of nonprofit grant management at National Geographic Society and United Way. In 2021, Ann was elected as state vice president of the Minnesota Farmers Union. She also serves on the board of governors of Farmers Union Industries. Along with her work for MFU, Ann is working with fellow Kernza growers to develop the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperation and serves as the secretary of that organization. So with that, I will let Ann take over.
Yeah.
And
No, I was just going to share that I'm a camelina grower as well.
Oh, yeah, and I was gonna say that too. So you grow camelina or have grown
I have
camelina
grown
too.
camelina. I
So-
don't have any in the ground this year. Yeah, I participated in 2021, 22 in the Forever Green Initiative and Bullock Partnership pilot program that was just looking to kind of test out, I think, it's some real world experience in the really cropping system with winter camelina into soybeans. Because we're organic producers, my husband and I have been kind of dabbling in the last several years about how do we take an organic system that we really like working in, but know the drawbacks of that with the amount of tillage that we do. And how do we kind of move it towards a more of a regenerative system? And so this is what has brought us back into the U of M's Forever Green Initiative and looking at cropping opportunities within that. We've been growing currants for the last 2-3 years now. And winter camelina ends up being, I think, a potentially good fit for us as we are looking to kind of keep more cover on our ground, reduce our tillage, and kind of be better stewards for our operation. We didn't do the relay cropping because of because we go into soybeans and we cultivate our soybeans. We knew that the amount of residue left over after taking off that camelina would become probably an issue for us when we went to go and try and cultivate it. For us, what we're looking for is, again, kind of lengthening out our cropping rotation and looking to, as a brassica, maybe capture some of the nitrogen that's in our ground, looking for that next cash crop that's gonna be, and generally that following that would be corn. So how can we, lower our off-farm inputs, get some actual cash out of the camelina sale, and kind of keep the soil more covered for longer. I think looking at the opportunities, especially where we are, double cropping is something that we're gonna look at forward in the future. Following camelina, going into either an organic dry bean or organic sunflowers for us. As another opportunity for us to kind of continue to utilize that ground, not miss out on a cash crop year. But still use the camelina, and we're really we're excited with the earlier maturing varieties that are coming online. At following soybeans, because our soybeans end up coming off generally in late September. Doing soybeans into camelina into maybe a double cropped organic crop following that. So we can keep that ground fully covered and get 3 crops in 2 years, which would be, I think, the ultimate goal. We're always kind of looking for ways that we can play with our rotation and get different crops, but multiple people have said it before, is that we need to have the market there. And I think camelina and pennycress, which we don't grow, but we're, keeping an eye on. Are those two forever green crops that I think have the biggest upside for marketability and can slide into like existing infrastructure that is already out there in our region, instead of trying to build infrastructure from scratch. That is what I think is the biggest upside from a grower's perspective, is that there are already markets available for crops like these.
Right. And that's what farmers always ask, well, what are the?
Where's it gonna go?
Where's
Yeah.
it gonna go?
That's
What am I gonna do with the seed?
That's the first question whenever I talk to another grower about it, is that, well, where do you haul it to? Where does it go? Before anything else, agronomic traits, all aside, where does it go? How much do you get for it?
Yeah. And it's good to hear, yield 10 is, they're taking care of that from start to finish, and cover cress too for pennycress. I mean, that's huge. What do you see in terms of, you mentioned keeping the soil covered. Weed suppression is one of the things that we've looked at in our research and have seen really good weeds.
Yeah.
What is your experience?
And so last summer when we had camelina on the ground, we didn't plant it last fall because we were in a drought. It was really dry.
Yeah.
We had some potential folks come out and look at the farm who had been experiencing the canola industry, looking to dabble into they were from Cargill. They had done canola before, they were looking at camelina as a potential new venture for them. And they were out on our operation just because it made sense for where they were. And they asked us, what's your herbicide program on this field? And it made my little organic heart just sink. I'm so used to just fancy weed fields. And I was like, there's no herbicide on it. It was the cleanest field on our farm, which was amazing, and after it matures, yes, we had some grass coming in underneath it once the sunlight could get down to the field. But when you take it relatively early, you can end up, from what I heard from the conventional folks who participated in it, is they completely eliminated their pre-emerge. Their need for a pre-emerge herbicide, which is pretty amazing, and especially like, you know, from my friends and neighbors, spending on pre-emerge stuff's expensive.
Yeah.
And so, you know, to both get like that lowered input cost and an additional crop, you know, some money out of it.
Right.
You know, it's that kind of triple bottom line win-win-win, right?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, yeah, that's a big benefit, I think, of using these winter oil seeds. Is you get those cover crop benefits, but yet, you know, you have a commodity, something to sell at the end.
And the other thing, I don't have any pictures, but I took some pictures the other day of, you know, where we just planted 12 acres in that little pilot program. I think we're looking to expand, you know, if we plant more than just the 12. But, you know, we have now a side-by-side of what was camelina into a cover crop. And then, what had been soybeans for the last year. And it seems like every year, we're getting a 4-inch rain that comes and pounds the ground, and crosses more or less everything over somewhere in late May to early July. We get that one really big heavy rain. And we had that last year. We took a really strong, it was the derecho that came through South Dakota and really kind of clobbered. You clobbered you and
We got
Morris. Yeah,
clobbered.
you guys got clobbered. We didn't have the wind
I'm still
damage.
dealing with the clobberness of
Yeah,
that storm.
we didn't have the wind damage, but we had the pounding rain from that storm, you know, the May 30th or whatever storm that we had.
Yep.
And it crested over that right next door soybean ground. And we ended up having just the lumpiest field there. And the soybeans really struggled as a result, right? Camelina popped back up. We have a draw that runs through that field, and it, you know, it laid down for a day, but it popped back up, and that's at that flowering stage, you know, where the plant is kind of vulnerable to that damage. And now that whole field, that whole area is in corn this year, and you can see we had some regrowth of the camelina that came out the back of the combine. The combine had we didn't have enough duct tape around things to keep it really.
It is small
Really
seed.
tight.
Really tight, really tight. But it terminated just fine, whether field cultivator anymore, or in the spring. But where we had that camelina cover and where we just had soybeans, that ground remains quite lumpy, even this season going into the corn. And the camelina cover, and I'm not an agronomist, I'm not a soil scientist, but it is mallow underfoot. It's the nicest corn stand we've got on the farm right now.
Right.
And I'm excited about, now it's just 12 acres. I'm excited about those 12 acres of the corn and what the potential is for this year's cash crop coming off of it. And that's what makes me kind of excited for, and the weed control on that. So what was soybeans? Much more, we're gonna be fighting it this year.
Yeah. Do we have more time? Should we keep going? or-
Yeah.
Yeah,
do-
we've got time, and you can bring Jerry in too if you want.
Okay, we can go to Jerry now. One other thing I wanted to ask before going to Jerry too was, so did you, with the equipment that you did all the planting and
Yeah,
harvesting
we
yourself?
managed it all.
What challenges did you see? What worked, what didn't
Oh, yeah.
work?
Yeah, so
Um,
we have an older John Deere 455 minimum till drill. And so we don't have a grass seed attachment, and the camelina seed is very, very small. So last year, or 21, when we planted it, it was jerry rigged a little bit, which is funny to me because my father-in-law's name is Jerry, and he's the problem solver on the
He's the one
farm.
that
So
rigged
we
it.
were literally in a bushel basket, hand mixing the camelina seed with oats as a nurse
Oh,
crop,
okay.
just to bulk up so we didn't have to rent SWCD's drill. And it worked really well. So we like hand mixed in a bushel basket with stick, the camelina and the oat seed in order to just bulk it up to get it to feed through our drill. And then we straight cut it with our combine. We run a Gleaner combine, and had the wind really down on it, but otherwise, used all of our regular equipment. We didn't need a specialized
Okay.
equipment for planting and harvest.
Yeah, I think that's what's neat too.
That's
Because you
really
can-
neat too.
Yeah, you don't have to, it doesn't take a lot of modification.
Matthew gave me the great idea that I need to ask my seed dealer next time to just pre-mix it with some oats, so I do not have to.
Or get the grass boxes. for
Yeah, all
seed.
right, yeah, I'd love to buy that's high up on our list, is
Yeah,
a new drill, but, with a grass box, yeah.
Yeah, and we run into the same issues over by us too. It's not too many farmers have those
Yeah,
type of planters because everything's corn and soybean, right?
yeah,
But you get those people that raise the small grains and some of the alternative, canola. We're seeing more canola and things like that show up around our area
Yeah.
too. While they have those type of planters, and,
Mhm.
it's not a stretch for them to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you want, should we move on to Jerry? And so next on our docket, Jerry has nettle. Okay, like having nettle and spinning. Sorry. Sometimes I gotta do those things to figure out how to pronounce the name correctly, but Jerry resides on his 3,002 acre family farm in St. Hilaire, Minnesota. Is that how you say
Hilaire.
Hilaire, okay. I'm not even from, I don't.
French isn't very good.
Yeah, I guess not. Hilaire. So that's fairly close to here, isn't it?
About 35-40 miles.
Okay, yeah, I don't think I've been in Minnesota a long time, but I've never been to Hilaire, Minnesota, so. Anyway, Jerry received his degree in agricultural economics from Northland Community College before serving in the U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service, by the way. Jerry serves on the board of AURI, representing a statewide farm organization as a member of the Minnesota Farmers Union. He was on the CHS board of directors from 1995 to 2014, serving as secretary, treasurer, and chairman of the board for part of that time. He has also been involved on his church board with the St. Hilaire Lions Club, township supervisor, lots of stuff. Minnesota Barley Growers Board, St. Hilaire Co-op Elevator Board, and the Minnesota Association Cooperatives Board. So a lot of boards.
Yes.
A lot of service. So with that, Jerry, we'll let you talk about your experiences with oilseed crops and oilseed crushing.
I was just a little bit curious, I was invited to participate in this forum, and what can I talk about as far as my experiences that would add value to this presentation? It's been fascinating, and listening to your experiences, and with Catalina, what you've learned, and a lot of that you can only learn by experimenting a little bit. You can't. There's nobody that's gonna tell you exactly that's how it works. This makes sense. You have to take a chance, you have to experiment. On our farm, I no longer live on our farm, I live in Zebra Falls right now, which is 10 miles down the road from St. Hilaire. We have tried a lot of different crops. We've grown commercially canola. We've grown commercially oil sunflowers, confection flowers. We've grown commercially soybeans, of course. It started I'm well aware of the experience of trying to figure out what you use to do certain things that you've never done before. My first experience with soybeans, harvesting soybeans, we swabbed them because we didn't have any straight attachments for that. So I applaud everyone that takes time to try different things like this. It's important. I like the one aspect of Camelina here about the fact that a company is willing to take delivery at your farm. And so you don't have the responsibility. When we grow canola, we gotta haul it to Hallock, to the CHS facility there. Or we could go to Fargo, of course, if we really wanted to spend some time on the road. Those are all things that I wish more commercial companies that are trying to introduce things would consider when they come to a farmer and said, you want to be a partner with me, because that's essentially what you're doing. When you're new in a profession or new in a commodity. My experiences with CHS, of course, have probably taught me a lot of stuff regarding how growers all over the world grow things and seen a lot of different crops. I've been to South Africa, I've been to China, I've been to Australia, New Zealand, and seen, how they deal with different things. It's amazing. Things you wouldn't think of using. Oh yeah, that's the only thing that works for us here, so. I would like to say thank you for all of you who have participated here today in teaching us what the possibilities are like, what we can possibly think about doing. As a farmer and as farmers, we need to hear this. This is how we learn. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this. And I'm certainly willing to answer any questions.
Well, that's so cool. I like you bringing that up about soybean because I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when my dad was growing soybean was still pretty new back when my dad was growing it, and sunflower was brand new. He used to try new and alternative stuff. Eventually went out of business back in I think it was the late 70s or early 80s. But anyway, but no, we always had some interesting things on the farm. And yeah, I can remember the soybeans. They looked a lot different, even morphologically than the soybeans that we grow today. And there was no weed control, the weed control options were not there. It was like, it's like working with camelina right now, and all of our crops were like that. I mean, people forget that, because corn and soybean are such no-brainers nowadays. While billions and billions of dollars have been spent on breeding and agronomics and so on. Not that much money has gone into camelina and pennycress. But although there is a lot of research efforts being made in that area, but I'm glad you brought that up because, people need to be reminded of that. That even, some of our commodity crops were at one point new and difficult to work with, and you had to learn how to manage them, so. Yeah, cool. Do we have other questions?
We can open up for the audience too if you want.
Yeah, maybe we could do that.
I'll check the virtual if you want to run the in-person.
Right.
It sounds like you grow a lot of great diversity of crops and you're always sort of switching the crops that you're growing in the field. And I'm wondering how that impacts you economically. Do you see that as a benefit, as insurance, like you're talking about with the weather? And then how do you navigate all those different markets?
It's a big portion of our job actually, is just kind of marketing the farm and our crops in the winter. We spend a fair bit of time for contracting and or spot marketing what we have on hand that's not contracted. It is both. We do it for just kind of spread out our risk, right? But it is also riskier to plant crops that don't have a developed, reliable market for it as well. So it's a balance, right? We're trying to manage our risk, but also it's kind of interesting to be growing different things and to be trying different systems but that brings with it its own inherent risk. Economically, she was here, then she left. We're big fans of farm business management, of really kind of keeping a really tight look on our books and making sure that the decisions we make are grounded in kind of economic viability. And making sure that, you know, we were beginning farmers, we farm with my husband's family. But, you know, we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room to try different things. So anything that we do try is on a pretty limited basis of acreage. So that we're not, you know, betting the farm on something completely new.
Kind of touching on what Grace mentioned, is there any interactions with some of these oilseed crops that don't have a strong holding in the riverbed, like camelina? With some of the big commodity crops like sugar beets or like those, like, I guess it's not common, but like especially crops like that, like sugar beets and potatoes, is there like any like disease interactions or anything that growers might be taking into account in that respect?
Yeah, we've looked at a lot of those things. Not so much, we've done a little bit of research with sugar beet, but not that much. Sugar beet is a little more challenging because it too is a brassica, number one. So you don't want to be following brassica upon brassicas. That's not a good thing. You want to try to rotate those further apart. But one of the challenges that we ran into when we were trying to, the research that we were doing, I don't know if you've done any similar type stuff with sugar. Well, no, you probably.
We're not growers, no.
Don't do sugar, okay. So anyway, we were trying to, usually sugar beet's taken off too late to follow it with camelina or pennycress very well. But when they take the headlands off and stuff for testing and things like that, that's, you know, we did some research of getting that covered with winter camelina. One of the biggest challenges that we ran into though are the herbicides that are used with sugar beet. Yeah. Carryover. Most of them kill the camelina. So we had to be very selective about where we were able to do that research, but
I'm familiar, the corn herbicide carryover is, from what I heard from folks who were doing the pilot program, was that was also a concern.
Yes.
Certain corn herbicides.
Yeah, and we do, I mean, there's more work being done on that, but we do have a grower's guide where we've got some of those herbicides. These are the ones you don't want to follow. So, yeah, so that is an issue, but, so other crops though, you know, winter camelina, for instance, it's got a really low water use. It doesn't use a lot of water. And when it's using its water is typically when it's flowering and beginning to set seed. You know, I mean, that's when most of the biomass is there. Well, that happens in like mid to late May, which usually we have, at least in our areas, an excess of water. This year we didn't. This year was one of the weirdest springs I've seen in the 20-some years that I've been back in Minnesota. But typically we have plenty of moisture where that's not a problem. So they help leave more moisture, you know, for the following crop because they use less water. So that's a good thing. And like any newer alternative crop, it helps break up disease and weed cycles, okay? Just lengthening rotations helps do that as well. So these new crops can be really beneficial to help break up, you know, some of those hard to get at disease and weed cycles that we see. And even some of the weeds that we've seen suppressed by winter camelina and pennycress too are some of the herbicide resistant ones like water hemp. Now, as Ann pointed out, when you take the crop off, you know, you are going to get some of those late season weeds. It's just going to happen, you know, but if you can reduce, you know, your amount of pesticides, herbicides, insecticides and so on, I mean, that's money in the bank too.
And those later season crops are not it's that early competition I find with what we see with our with our crops that do the most damage for
Do
you.
the most, yeah,
Right,
so that's
I
huge.
imagine it's the same in conventional or organic, you know, where you wanna have that early season weed control more than later, you get some grass coming. That's a
Yep.
huge deal, right?
But I know exactly what you were talking about by not planting the camelina last fall. So we did a planting date study with pennycress. Anything planted after, I think it was September 20th, or it might have been the 15th. None of that emerged. It was just like, it was planting in the dust.
Yeah.
You know? Sure. Yeah, it's kind of a weird year. And then we had, heavy snowpack, at least around us.
Oh, we got the same.
But it all melted. Most of it went into the soil and some of it
Went off.
went off the soil. But then we got this stinking dry spring and now it's back to being dry again. It's just like, yeah. Are we
Okay, yeah,
time wise okay?
we're done.
Oh, okay. You're done.
Thank you. Luca, come on up. I'll give an intro while you're walking. Luca Zulo is AURI's Senior Director of Science and Technology. Luca started his career at Shell Research in the Netherlands, where he was involved in designing novel oil and petrochemical processes focused on processing modeling, control, and integration. He continued his work in Minneapolis for Cray Research and Silicon Graphics, leading the development of some of the world's most extensive process plant simulations. Later at Cargill, he worked in corporate R&D on novel agricultural commodities, transformation processes, emphasizing biofuels development and renewable energy in plant operations. He led a group that developed multiple domestic and international projects in anaerobic digestion, biomass utilization, and carbon intensity reduction. After Cargill, he's worked with several early stage companies, leading or supporting the transition to commercialization from early stage R&D. Luca holds a degree in chemical engineering from the University of Padova, Italy, and a PhD in chemical engineering from the Imperial College of Science, Technology, and Medicine in London, UK. We are happy to have Luca at AURI, and he's going to give us a brief overview of the Ag Innovation Campus before we break for lunch.
Thank you, everyone. And, I know that that is a responsibility. You want to go to lunch, so I'll be brief. Today, I want to talk to you about the Ag Innovation Campus, which is a new concept in the development of agricultural commodities that is now being developed here in Crookston. I suppose I have to go page down. Click it on the table. Yeah, that's would be the easy thing to do. Okay, it's okay, perfect. Okay, that's that. So so as I said, there's a new concept in agricultural technology incubator. In a single facility, we'll have four components. A commercial scale crush plant, which also will generate revenue to support the other activity. A laboratory, and I will go to more detail about the laboratory does later. And then offices and meeting spaces for accommodate both companies and obviously meetings and be flexibly laid out. And then most important, innovation base. So the agricultural innovation campus, I'm to help support the creation of new products, which in turn we generate jobs and foster the development of new supply chains to increase the value of agriculture regionally, but ultimately also more globally across the whole United States. The vision, this is the vision of the Ag Innovation Center campus, is to host a variety of private and public groups within agriculture by providing the tools and technology to expand value-added agricultural products while offering a campus suitable for real-world learning, both in production agriculture as well as the technology serving the campus. This vision was developed by the realization that while there is certainly a lot of activity done in this area by a large corporation, there is a space needed to develop new products for startups and for entrepreneurs that always have problems accessing the type of infrastructure that is really necessary to bring an idea from the conceptual stage to the proof of concept and then the early commercialization. And this is really what the Ag Innovation Campus wants to do. At the same time, we want to make an entity that can sustain itself by revenue through a crush plant that again, can operate at commercial scale. The members of the Ag Innovation Campus are Minnesota soybean growers, Minnesota soybean, us, EURI, and Farmers Union. And all these 4 organizations are represented in the board of the Ag Innovation Campus. So today we have, and later you're gonna visit, those of you that want can visit, and have signed for the tour, they can visit where you are with the facility. For phase 1, where we are today, is developing the crush plant and the production lab. So the lab is going to, in this case, will support mostly using QA and product characterization, the crush plant, and then we'll have office space. The phase 2, which things are becoming more exciting, at least from my perspective, although phase 1 is very important, that's provide the anchor. We're going to create a research lab, so more focus on exploratory work than the QA and product characterization that supports production, and the innovation base. Also is going to be the new home for URI, and will be based there. Lastly, in phase 3, we'll extend the scope and the number of innovation bay, allowing actually the companies to bring in potentially to actually build the small pilots, or most pilots there. So the crush plant are 3 independent crush line, 80 tons each per day, up to we have a capacity, we will have a capacity to process up to 240 tons per day, or 9,000 bushel a day of soybean, if you use soybean. The plant will be able to process more than soybean, however. And we aim to make this plant a destination processing plant also for new oil seeds, particularly advanced genetics and traits, in which case we're going to be able to having the dedicated processing line to maintain identity, and also novel crops, including winter cover crops, for which today, the ability of facilities where to produce commercial quantity of the oil is lacking. The crush plant will provide a variety of benefits to the facility. Obviously, it provides revenue will provide revenue to the facility. We have access to feedstock for innovation partners. Today, if you want to do, you want a reasonable amount of, of cover crop seeds, some say pennycress oil, to make say reasonable amount of jet fuel for testing. Well, there is really no place to go. You have to go by, few pints at a time, which is very impractical. As I said, we can identify preserved products through custom runs, and also we'll have flexible operation for product and process development. This crush plant are big enough to be representative of commercial scale operation, yet small enough that we can rapidly change operations without having the burden of large time for startup shutdown and reconfiguration. The innovation bay will allow startups and innovators to establish a physical presence in the campus. So again, you want to do some work on an oleochemical. We have the feedstock. The innovation bay will allow an entrepreneur to set up a small facility where they can start doing that work with direct access to the support infrastructure from analytics, wet chemistry, and so on that might be necessary. And also will provide access to office and shared meeting facility, thus allowing a small entrepreneur to have the footprint that will be very difficult to have without a large amount of investment. What you see in the picture here is an example of the type of company we see coming in Design and Innovation Bay, and this is Plasma Blue. Plasma Blue is another concept in biodiesel production promoted by, it comes from the University of Minnesota, from the south, from S-Rock in Waseca, and is now commercialized by Plasma Blue, which is a company promoted by Minnesota Soy. Well, lastly, we have a laboratory. Again, the laboratory, as I said, there are two components of the laboratory. One is what they call the production laboratory, which support craft line with characterization and typical quality assurance services. And then we'll have, as I say, phase two, a state-of-the-art research lab to support product and process development. And we're going to focus on providing support and having all the analytical and wet chemistry capabilities to do oleochemicals, protein processing, material science, and renewable energy projects. And so, you know, again, the area, and so we basically cover all the possible area where both vegetable oil and protein derived from this type of crops can be developed as a future product. So later we will, after lunch, we can go to do the visits, and they have the slides to give me a direction to park on the south side. And I think someone else will provide you direction to get there.
Thank you.
So any question, but otherwise, thank you for coming, and we look forward to show you the campus.
There is one question.
Sure.
Will the crush plant use solvent extraction? Have you incorporated a refinery?
No, is a mechanically pressed plant, so there is no solvent extraction.
Okay. Thank you, Luca. Okay. Thank you again to our lunch and coffee sponsors. The Minnesota Soy Research and Promotion Council made us full in our bellies and awake with all the caffeine they're providing. So thank you again to MSRPC. We're now going to open up for 20 to 30 minutes-ish, till around noon rather, for some questions. So if anyone has anything from our virtual audience, please submit those into our Q&A portal, and then we'll also open live for those of us who are here in person. And the first question that I've got online is, there are a few innovative farmers growing winter oilseeds. What are some major barriers that prevent adoption? Oh, sorry, prevent broader adoption. Does anyone want to take that one? I think one thing that I heard earlier was, where does it go after it's been harvested? So we know that some companies are taking that offtake at about 100% right now, but there may be some need for developing aggregation hubs or cooperatives to help market that grain once it's grown. There were a lot of other things just in thinking about timing, but hopefully as we progress in our research and some of the brave farmers out there willing to kind of ground truth for us, that will help iron out some of those challenges that other farmers see as far as being willing to adopt this on a broader scale.
I'll throw a pair of comments out there too.
Yes.
I think Carol said something about hemp grain, hemp oil earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm working in the hemp grain and oil space, and I think some of the challenges are, obviously, it's got to be a vocational crop, number one. Number two is it's got to be cleaned somewhere. Some of the cleaning facilities can't handle all that oil. In that particular one, you got to find the right place for that location. So even though I'm based in South Dakota, we look for places in Minnesota and North Dakota for the cleaning. The market is robust. Question is, will a farmer want to look into rotation, look into hemp or some other oil seed.
Would you mind coming up? I'm not sure if the mic is gonna pick you up for our virtual audience. And maybe introduce yourself and what your company is.
Sure.
Make sure you tell them you're from South Dakota.
Okay, so Randy Stratton, I'm from South Dakota, Sioux Falls. Working in the hemp space now for over 6 years. And so, I mean, when you look at oil crops in general, you got to decide, okay, first of all, what's the value proposition? Why do we want to look at any type of oil seed? Why would you look at hemp? How does it fit in the rotation? Why is it good for the soil? I think some of the questions are, is it difficult to grow? Hemp is a little bit of a, outlier in some ways because it's new. There's some political, we might say, attachments to that as well that are out there still. But basically, on the oil side of it, there's certainly demand for the grain and the oil in the marketplace. In fact, there's so much demand in the United States, we can't even come close to meeting demand on that. And so some of the grain and some of the oil is being shipped to Asia because the demand there is actually increased. But going back to the cleaning part of this challenge, if we're growing hemp in South Dakota or North Dakota, we've got to find a cleaning facility that can handle all the oil in that cleaning process. We've tried a couple of cleaning facilities in South Dakota before we ship it to our customer, who's actually processing that grain and oil in Saskatchewan. So it does put a lot of miles on. But what we found is because of the heavy oil content in that, you've got to go to a specific cleaning facility. So we take ours to Drayton, North Dakota, and that's where it's cleaned, all the way from southern South Dakota. We move it up there. And so I think the facility issue is a big deal. We got to get in the region. I think we got to get some additional cleaning and crushing capacity. Great to see that there's something here being developed here in Crookston. I think more is better. I just came from the Innovation Tech Conference in Fargo yesterday, and that was really the big topic was, can we get more capacity, more processing built in our region to handle some of these additional new crops, ancient grains, Catalina, hemp. So some of those things need to be worked out in the supply chain because the market is robust. I don't know if Harold, you shared prices yesterday or not, but on the hemp grain side, if you're conventional, you're going to be in that right around 60 cents a pound. If you're on the organic side, you're going to be somewhere in that $1.20 to $1.30 a pound. And if you got good moisture, you do the math on that, of course, there's a good return for your investment as well. But I think probably more of an answer that you were looking for. But I think the thing is supply chain needs to get built out. More processing like we're seeing here today is really exciting. I'd like to see a little more help and collaboration between Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. I think some investments actually starting to pool to collaborate on big projects like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so hats off to the group that's working on this project here and to all the parties involved. So that's my answer for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I believe there may be other facilities coming online, but Milburn Seeds is a grant recipient of some of the partnerships for climate smart commodities.
Right.
And they're putting up a new sea clean facility. I don't know the timeline or details, but if there's others out there, other entrepreneurs out there, just hear us. We need sea cleaning and pre-processing for these grains to really take off in the supply chain. Okay. No more questions online. Are there any in-person questions that we can answer? Or we can just chat, that's fine too.
Well, maybe really quick, kind of based on the online question about barriers. I'm gonna put Matt maybe on the spot a little bit to talk more about the ECO program with
Yes.
FBI, University of Minnesota.
Yeah, come on up.
Sure.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
So, one of the programs that we have, collaboratively with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and it's actually the fund that funds my position, which is technical assistance in agronomy two growers directly on Kernza or intermediate wheatgrass, winter camelina, which was relevant to this discussion, hybrid rye, and winter barley. It's a 2-year funding program. Eco Round 1, which just wrapped up this past year, was focused just on Kernza. So the Round 2 funding, which is starting just now, is on those 4 crops that I mentioned. And it consists of an ecosystem service payment to farmers enrolled in the program. So that's anywhere from 20 to 40 to 50 bucks based on nitrogen leaching modeling on their fields. And it's an enrollment basis by field. So each grower can get, I think, between 100 and 150 acres per crop, with the goal of seeding 5,000 acres between those 4 crops by 2024. So that's the ultimate goal. And really like I mentioned earlier, the whole focus is on ecosystem services. That's really where the horsepower from the state of Minnesota is trying to address water quality through these agricultural programs. So these winter crops and perennial crops draw down nitrogen, prevent nitrogen leaching, keep soil in place. So that's really the added benefit that people are incentivizing on the farmer end. There's also rudimentary crop insurance as part of this program too. So in the event of a market failure, crop failure, farmers can get up to half the cost of production, or up to about 75 bucks an acre as part of that program too. So there is specific counties that we're focusing on, primarily addressing areas of the state that have impaired water quality, and also wellhead protection areas or drinking water supply management areas around the state as well. But in essence, it's most of the state of Minnesota plus tribal nation. All tribal nations are covered under that program. So if anybody has any interest in that, I think we can share my contact maybe, or but it's something I can certainly chat with you more now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a few questions of my own, unless there's others in the audience that we can call upon. Okay. So we talked a little bit about some of the government regulations and how that might impact these markets, but for the emerging crops, I want to pull this to everyone, but how will some of those government regulations impact successful commercialization? So I'm thinking of the renewable fuel standard, but also for co-product development, things like AFCO status, grass status, some of those regulatory permits that we need to develop new uses for these crops. How do we see those timelines or regulations really impacting successful commercialization?
I mean, there's 3 agencies, they talk about being framework coordinated agency like USDA, FDA, and EPA, but they're not really coordinated. I think the EPA piece is going to be critical for any new crop because of plant-back restriction. I think somebody talked about it. Just because you're bringing, even though it's non-feed, you're still feeding that meal to chicken or, any industry or poultry or pork industry. The biggest challenge is how do you make sure that the herbicides that are used in corn production or soybean production do not carry over, because they have a longer duration. Like the EPA one is going to take time, and I think because there's no labels for those crops. I mean, whether it's camelina, carinata, pennycrust, there's like group 20, I believe, where there's some herbicides that you can take advantage of, but when you start scaling up really and think about the herbicides that are used heavily in corn today, it's going to be some work, and I think that's going to be one delay. I think from the agency standpoint, FDA in terms of like grass or AFCO, I think they're slightly dependent on what EPA decides with what the label will happen, but also I think what goes into it is like studying the meal and doing trials. I think it's going to take about 3 to 5 years for any crop to really scale up and get to. I mean, I don't want to say grass is relatively easy, but grass can be achieved, but getting to an AFCO label will add another couple of years just to, there's a lot of technical requirements about how do you grow it, what environments do you grow it, and then you make sure that you run those trials. You run crush independently. And for us, I mean, I'm sure that same thing for E10 is USDA remains a big black box because things have really changed. Previously, gene editing regulations were much more straightforward. Today, it seems like we are moving backward from a technology standpoint. I think that so USDA will see how things evolve, but it's a big challenge, and we're just trying to figure out a way how do we bring in traits without being affected by those new regulations because they're changing so quickly.
Thank you.
And that's, I add to that as well, that, you know, when we talk about barriers or challenges to bringing these new crops and these new traits forward, when it comes to the regulatory side, that is one of the biggest challenges, is the technology is moving faster than the regulations are used to dealing with. So we can introduce new traits and bring things to the bride or to the market faster than we can get regulatory approval to be able to go out and plant them. Not, you know, which is a balancing act. And it's also, as we were mentioning too, as we bring the say herbicide tolerance traits on, we then also have to make sure that we have labels so we can buy these chemicals. We're working across multiple states in that situation, or multiple countries in our situation. So that has challenges and sort of slows up the process as well, because then we're not producing those chemicals, so we have to then start interacting with these companies and working with them to do this. Going back to the barriers, when I start looking at the marketing or the market side of the equation, part of the challenge is that the economy of scale too. So as we're small and at the research scale, we start to get some things, but as we start to want to ramp up and going to larger acres, one of the challenges we've run into is that, you know, we've got interest from large crush facilities, but we are nowhere near their minimum crush capacity. So then we have to, as we sort of talked about before too, we then are trucking stuff all over the countryside, you know, which affects the cost of it and things like that, so that we can find smaller crush facilities or so that we can go through that startup phase. So that's one of the challenges of the company starting off like this and doing stuff like that. So those are some of the barriers that we would have.
Thank you. I'm noticing that many of the other questions I had in my bank have sort of been addressed by everyone. But unless there's any other questions live, yes, go ahead.
I had a related question for the last speaker. What kinds of breeding techniques are you using to develop these new products?
Is that for Ratan or Darren? Maybe both.
Both of you, because you're both involved in that.
I mean, we, for cover cress, I mean, we use traditional breeding, as well as new modern technologies like everything. It's a balancing act depending on what trait you're really looking for. When it comes to yield, we still believe that traditional breeding is the way to go. When it comes to specialized trait or compositional traits, we look at gene editing, you know, whether it's the herbicide or composition.
And I'm going to defer to Dr.
For the side, honestly, it's the exact same. We're using all the traditional methods, as well as new technologies, depending on the regulations allow. So, same, really, same answer.
Okay.
About 5 minutes left, so any burning questions, don't be afraid to ask. Harold, I know you've probably got some swimming around in your noggin.
I just think there's when it comes to the hemp side, I think that there's I'm more optimistic now than I was before because of working with companies that are really starting to put some major investment in the state. When the investment comes, then the end user gets satisfied because they know that there's going to be that supply there. So I'm happy about that, and I think that's going to yield a nice mix between food and fiber. That's going to keep that as part of the ecosystem. So,
Thank you. And I see there's a question at the back. Do you want to run up here?
Thank you for your audience.
Yeah.
We think it's a legume, it's got oil properties as well.
Another thing to consider in the rotation is fava beans.
The fava bean market is also going really well. It'll grow well in this area and further north. And the food companies want it. And they want it because some of the other legume options that they have that they're mixing for flour, they have to add more additives because of its bitterness, right? They have to mask that in the food processing development. So in fava, you don't have to mask any bitterness. It's not there. So you can get the flour side, plus you can get the oil. And the demand is really a hockey stick, to be honest with you. I've been in the hemp grain sector for about 7 years now. The fava bean graph looks pretty amazing from the food processing perspective. The market is really trending up, and so you have to grow it north, further north the better. So I would say from right here up to the Canadian border, both in Minnesota and North Dakota would be ideal. And the market's ready for it. So again, there's another oil product, again, crushing opportunities, cleaning opportunities. If you have any questions on that, you can give me a call or see me afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question. So,
Can you either speak louder from up here? I don't know if it captures.
so maybe this is for Dr. Olson, I don't know. We're talking, we need more beans produced, more, like, we have a lot of emerging crops, which is exciting. I mean, I'm a grower. But at some point, are we talking about losing some of our acres that are more dedicated to producing food? Or I'm just curious how that plays out, or how some of you that are more experts see that playing out.
It's a great question.
I can try to take a shot at that. No, it's, because it is a question. It is a question that I get fairly often. So, and we've talked about this in a lot of different crops we've already discussed today about what's the growth rate of the production side versus the growth rate of the consumption side, and trying to balance those out and get the infrastructure put in place. As I said kind of during my comments, right now, the path of least resistance, in particular for the large oilseeds, is obviously soybean side. So the question, as renewable diesel starts to kick in and we get these additional crush plants, where is soybeans going to come from? Short term, we're basically going to steal them from exports. So short term, we're not necessarily going to need a lot of growth in acres. It's going to be more a shifting of, well, instead of sending them overseas, we'll likely use more of them domestically. Now that can only go on so far. At some point, we are going to have to have growth. So the other unanswered question in my mind, as we move forward in time, as we think forward, is: all right, are there other oil seeds that could be a substitute, a complement to the base soybean? Because again, when you think about oil produced per acres, it changes, math changes. The other thing that we have not spent a tremendous amount of time on, we're starting to hear some more discussion and rumblings, is from a breeding program to increase the oil content in the soybeans. So far, traditionally, we have focused primarily on yield, on herbicide tolerance and disease issues. We really haven't spent a lot of time on the output or use traits of soybeans. I know there are some in the food industry, food grade soybeans that have done some of that, but for commercial ag and for commercial soybeans, I don't know. I'm not a geneticist. I'm a four-time economist trying to figure all this out. So it's a matter of how far down that path, what is the oil content that we could potentially breed into the soybean. The final thing that we need to be thinking about is also every year we do have a yield trend, we have a growth curve. So it's not that we necessarily have to bring in a lot of more acres. We may do that, I don't know, we've got some CRP ground we might be able to utilize, again, that's what we're pulling into the data. The issue is, all right, what is the growth rate and yield potential? What is the growth rate and oil content? Is there the capacity out of the existing land base that we have to be able to do a better job? And I don't have the answers to those long term. So short term, over the next several years, I think the short term answer is we're just going to steal it out of exports. We're not going to be able to export as much. The domestic market will provide a higher price, and we'll try and retain those soybeans instead of sending them to. Long answer to a short question.
And I'd echo that. especially from a yield perspective. How can we match southern Minnesota, Iowa yields in the north, from soybean, oil without taking away protein, because then you've got an issue with, on the meal side. And then politically, it's not popular, but we are taking thousands and thousands of prime egg acres out of production. And I like it, but it's solar. So how are we managing politically and permitting wise, to accomplish all of it? Because we will run into issues. If you look at, southern Minnesota, and you look at kind of the, Sherco area where thousands of acres are going, prime egg acres are coming out of production to go to solar. So it's a lot of issues we need to still tackle.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place for us to end with what comes next and how do we address the current challenges that have been mentioned today. I think we've heard some really great progress, but not everything is solved, and it's good to keep that in mind as we move forward and how all this fits together and meeting the demand that's there without necessarily needing to increase acreage. And that's kind of the sweet spot that I hope winter oilseeds can start to fill, where we're farming multiple crops on the same land, but then these other issues still are at play that we need to solve in the supply chain as well. So thank you again to everyone for joining us today, and especially to our industry partners who are here to present, as well as to our participants both online and in person for joining and engaging with us today. A recording of our entire conversation will be available at auri.org, and please join us again for future Fields of Innovation events. This concludes our AURI Connects Fields of Innovation event for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. Those of us here in person, we can now begin to shuffle our way to the Ag Innovation Campus. Thank you.